I am Reginald Colby, 72 years old, and I spent 45 years building a kingdom for my family. I worked double shifts at the port of Charleston, missed birthdays to secure promotions, and swallowed my pride more times than I can count, so my children would never know the taste of hunger. I thought I was their hero. I thought I was the patriarch of a legacy that would last generations. But it took exactly 45 seconds for them to show me that I was nothing more than a bank account with a pulse. This past Saturday, at what was supposed to be my retirement celebration, crystal glasses raised the air thick with the scent of expensive roasting meat. My wife Dorothea stepped up onto that stage. Not to honor me, to destroy me. She pressed a yellow manila envelope into my hands right there in front of 200 people, wearing a smile so cold it stopped the blood in my veins. Divorce papers. That's what was inside. Darnell, my son, started clapping. Rochelle, my daughter, let out a cheer. My daughter-in-law, Tiffany, had her phone up before I could even process what was happening, broadcasting my disgrace live for anyone who cared to watch. I stood there, that document clutched in my hands, the one that dissolved everything I'd built with her, and something inside me gave way. Not tears, not a single one. No pleading either. I uncapped my Waterman fountain pen, laid those papers across the hood of my car, and put my signature on every line. Then I said 5 words, quiet and steady, that none of them took seriously enough. You have no idea what you just did. Welcome back to Honor Revenge Stories. I am glad you are here with me today. Before we go any further, drop a quick comment and tell me what the weather looks like where you are sitting right now. Something about settling in on a quiet afternoon or a rainy evening makes a story like this. One land a little differently, a note. Before we begin, some elements of this story have been shaped for dramatic storytelling purposes, and any resemblance to specific real individuals or events is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth at the heart of it. That evening began as the crowning moment of my life. The grounds of our estate in Hilton Head Island had been turned into something out of a dream, lights strung everywhere, luxury at every turn. The kind of gathering a black man born in the 1950s had no business expecting. I stood on that mahogany deck in a tuxedo that cost more than my father's first car, surveying a sea of faces. Colleagues from the Port of Charleston, city council members, neighbors who had spent years whispering theories about where my money came from. The jazz band was playing a slow, aching blues number, and the air carried the scent of salt water and success. I tapped my spoon against my champagne flute. The ring cut through the noise like a knife, and the crowd fell quiet. A swell of pride rose up in my chest. This was the moment. I had made it to the other side. I cleared my throat and began to speak. I thanked God for my health. I thanked my team for standing by me, and then I turned toward my family. Dorothea sat in the front row, draped in a silver gown I had paid for. Her hair perfectly coiffed, her complexion flawless, courtesy of the finest dermatologists South Carolina had to offer. My son Darnell sat beside his wife Tiffany, and my daughter Rochelle sat close to her husband Garrett, their hands intertwined. I lifted my glass toward them. Every drop of sweat, I told them. Every late night, every sacrifice, it was all for this family. I was moments away from announcing the surprise cruise around the world I had booked for Dorothea and me when the music cut out without warning. The microphone in my hand let out a sharp screech of feedback. I glanced toward the DJ booth confused, and that's when I saw Dorothea rising from her seat. No smile, no tears of joy. What was on her face I had never seen in 45 years of marriage, a cold, calculated composure. She crossed to the deck stairs, her heels striking the wood in a steady rhythm. Click, click, click. Like the countdown on a detonator. She didn't reach for the microphone. She didn't need to. Her hand went into her silver clutch and came out holding a thick yellow envelope. Not a card. A legal document. She drove it into my chest hard enough to push me back a half step. The crowd gasped a sound that swallowed what remained of the party's warmth. Dorothea's voice carried easily without any amplification. "Happy retirement, Reginald," she said. "My gift to you is my freedom. I want a divorce, and I am taking the house, the accounts, and the dignity you have spent so long hoarding for yourself." I stood there locked in place. My mind refused to make sense of it. This was the woman beside me for 45 years. The woman who sat up through the night nursing me through pneumonia. The same woman for whom a diamond bracelet was sitting, wrapped on her vanity table, at that very moment. I looked down at the envelope. petition for dissolution of marriage. It was real. I searched her face for any trace of a prank, a joke, some signal that this was theater. Her eyes gave me nothing. And then the second blow landed before I could draw a breath. My son Darnell was on his feet, not to stand beside me, not in disbelief. He moved straight to the stage to his mother's side and snatched the microphone from the stand. My son. The boy I had sent through private schools. The man whose 3 failed business ventures I had quietly covered 3 times, grinned out at that crowd. "It is about time," he said. "Mom has been living in a financial prison for decades. Dad controlled every penny, every decision, treating us like employees instead of family. Today the tyranny ends. Mom deserves her half. We deserve our shares. The Moore family is finally under new management." The betrayal hit like something physical, a punch straight to the gut. I looked at Darnell standing there in a suit I knew I'd put on my American Express card the month before. He wore the look of a man who believed he had just conquered something. And then I turned my eyes to the crowd. The room had fractured clean down the middle, and that divide told me everything I needed to know about who was in my corner and who never had been. My colleagues, people of my generation, looked stricken. My former assistant, Mrs. Winthrop, had her hand pressed to her mouth, tears running freely. The neighbors stared at the floor, shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. But my family, that picture seared itself into me for good. At the VIP table, Rochelle wasn't weeping. She was applauding, a slow, deliberate clap, her head nodding, as if she were watching a show she had personally staged. Her husband, Garrett, a man I never trusted, a man who couldn't hold my gaze the day he asked for my daughter's hand, was reclined in his chair. Swirling his drink, a smirk settled across his face like he owned the room. But Tiffany was the one who finished it. My daughter-in-law, the woman who proclaimed her love for this family and our culture, yet had spent 2 years quietly trying to scrub my history from this house. She was standing on her chair phone, raised high, a ring light blazing from its case. She was live streaming. I could see the screen from where I stood, hearts drifting up the side of the video. She was narrating to her followers, laughing. "Catch this tea, guys," she called out. "The patriarch is finally going down. Generational wealth transfer happening live." She was monetizing my destruction. My life was her content. The noise of that party became a low, distant roar inside my head. The humiliation was absolute. This was planned, every detail of it. Legal papers don't materialize by coincidence. A coordinated speech doesn't write itself. They had assembled this ambush to cause maximum public damage, to leave me so exposed, so shamed, that I would never find the will to resist behind closed doors. They wanted me to collapse. They were counting on the angry black man. They wanted me to shout, to swing, to hand them the footage they needed to cast me as the villain and justify stripping me clean. I looked at Dorothea. She was braced for the eruption. She wanted me to give her grounds to call security. But I am a logistics man, 40 years moving millions of tons of cargo. I learned long ago that when a storm rises, you don't curse the wind. You secure the ship, and you wait for the tide to turn. I drew a slow breath. I smoothed the lapels of my tuxedo. Not one tear fell. I stepped down off that deck, and the crowd split open ahead of me, people pulling back as though I were something dangerous, something contagious. I moved past the pool, past the untouched buffet tables, straight to the driveway where my pride sat waiting. My vintage 1968 Cadillac DeVille, midnight blue, immaculate. I set the yellow envelope flat on the hood. The metal held the day's warmth still. I reached into my breast pocket and drew out my Waterman fountain pen, the one Dorothea gave me for our 30th anniversary. I uncapped it. The gold nib caught the moonlight. I turned to the final page of the settlement agreement without bothering to read what came before it. I already knew the substance. It said they wanted everything. And right then, I chose to let them have it. I signed my full name, Reginald Augustus Colby. The ink went down dark and final. I capped the pen. I gathered up the papers. I walked back to Dorothea. She flinched as I approached her body, bracing for something. I simply extended the envelope toward her. She took it, her hands trembling, not with fear, but with greed. I bent close to her ear. Her perfume reached me, Lancôme la vie est belle. I had bought her at the duty-free shop in Paris. I kept my voice low, meant only for her and Darnell. "You wanted a quick settlement. You got it. But you have absolutely no idea what you just did. You think you've just won the lottery, but you just pulled the pin on a grenade and you're all standing in a circle holding it." I straightened up. I didn't spare the house a glance. I didn't look at a single guest. I walked to my car and got in. I turned the key. The engine came alive with a deep guttural growl like something powerful rousing from a long sleep. I took no bags, no change of clothes, not one family photograph. I reversed out of the driveway of the estate I had purchased with my own blood and labor. As I rolled down the long, winding road away from it all, I checked the rearview mirror one final time. Champagne bottles going up, Tiffany dancing. They were throwing a celebration over my remains. But they were wrong. They were celebrating their own funeral. They just didn't know it yet. I reached for my phone on the passenger seat and dialed the one number I knew by heart. It was time to make the call. It was time to initiate Protocol Zero. I drove 40 minutes in complete silence. The only sounds were the purr of the DeVille's engine and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat settling into something calm and deliberate. I didn't pull into a motel parking lot. I didn't go looking for a shoulder to cry on. I drove to the one place my family had no knowledge of. 10 years ago, when Darnell dropped out of college for the second time and came to me demanding $50,000 for a clothing line that never produced a single shirt, I bought an apartment. It sits in a high-rise downtown, looking out over the city skyline, a fortress of glass and steel watched over by a doorman who knows me only as Mr. Reginald, the quiet gentleman in 4B. I pulled into my reserved spot in the underground garage. I rode the elevator up. The doors parted with a soft chime. I keyed in my entry code. 1951, the year I was born. The lock clicked open. I stepped inside, and the quiet wrapped around me like something familiar. This apartment is nothing like the sprawling estate in Hilton Head Island. There are no floral curtains that Dorothea picked out. No sticky handprints left by grandchildren who had been raised to believe Grandpa's only purpose was buying things. The floors are polished concrete. The furniture is black leather and chrome. It is spare. It is functional. It is mine. I crossed to the floor-to-ceiling window and stood looking out at the city lights below. Down there, people were rushing, scheming, loving, and deceiving. Up here, there was nothing but clarity. I had kept this place ready for a day I prayed would never arrive. But I built my career on logistics and contingency planning. You never sail a ship without checking the lifeboats first. Tonight, I had launched one. I went to the small safe concealed behind a painting of a jazz trumpeter. I worked the dial. Inside a burner phone, a stack of cash, and a ledger. I took the phone, fully charged. I had checked it every Sunday for 10 years. I settled into the leather armchair. It groaned softly beneath me. I dialed a number that lived not in any contact list, but in the back of my mind, where only essential things are kept. It rang once, twice. Desmond Fairweather picked up on the third ring. His voice was gravelly awake and sharp. "Mr. Colby, I take it the party's over." I glanced at the digital clock on the wall, 10:30 at night. "The party is just beginning, Desmond," I said. My voice didn't waver. "Execute Protocol Zero." I could hear the satisfaction in Desmond's voice when he responded. He had been sitting on that instruction for 5 years. He had no love for my family, but a great deal of respect for my money. "Consider it done, Reg. Do you want to go through the checklist?" "They read it to me," I said. I needed to hear it out loud. I needed to feel the machinery of consequence engaging. Desmond's tone shifted clip professional. "As first, the joint checking account at Chase Bank frozen. Any withdrawal attempt over $50 triggers a fraud alert." "Good." "Second, the American Express black card issued to Darnell Colby. Canceled as of 2 minutes from now. Status flagged as stolen." "Excellent." Yet third, the Platinum Visa issued to Dorothea Colby. Limit reduced to 0. Fourth, utility auto pay on the Hilton Head Island estate. Electricity, gas, water, high-speed fiber optic internet, all canceled. Providers have been notified that the account holder is no longer responsible for billing. Disconnect notices go out within 48 hours if no new payment method is supplied. "Let them sit in the dark," I said. And fifth, lawn and pool maintenance contract canceled. Sixth, the country club family membership revoked. Desmond paused. "Anything else, Reg?" I thought about the garage. 3 vehicles sitting there. The Range Rover that Tiffany drove on my lease. The Porsche that Darnell insisted was a professional necessity. "Repossession," I said. "Call the leasing agency. Tell them I'm defaulting on the Range Rover and the Porsche. The vehicles are at the Hilton Head Island address, and the keys are likely in the ignition. Pick them up tonight if that's possible." That's nuclear, Reg," Desmond said quietly. "They wanted a war, Desmond. I'm just supplying the ammunition. Send the letters, file the motions, and Desmond." Yes, Reg. If any of them contact you, tell them you are acting on your client's instructions and that any further harassment will result in a restraining order. Understood. Sleep well, Mr. Colby. I ended the call. I set the phone down on the glass coffee table. I leaned back and let my eyes close. For 45 years, I had been the dam holding reality at bay for this family. Every bill absorbed, every consequence cushioned, every hardship quietly turned away before it could reach them. I thought I was protecting them. I was wrong. I had been crippling them. I had raised people who believed electricity appeared by magic and that money was simply a thing I produced. Now the dam was gone. The water was moving. The phone buzzed, not the burner. My personal phone, the one I deliberately left, switched on for this very moment. I picked it up. A text from Darnell, sent 3 minutes after I'd hung up with Desmond. What the hell is wrong with you, old man? I'm at the Indigo Lounge with investors. My card just got declined. The bartender cut it up in front of everyone. Fix this now, or I swear to God, I will come find you. I read it twice. The scene assembled itself in my mind without effort. Darnell in his overpriced suit trying to run bottles of champagne for people who only valued him because of my last name. The smirk dissolving as the bartender shook his head. The muffled laughter from his circle. The panic clawing up his throat as it registered that he had no cash to cover the tab. I didn't write back. I removed the SIM card from the phone. I snapped it clean in two. I dropped both pieces into the trash. Then I walked to the kitchen. It was time for my ritual. My family always mocked the way I made coffee. They had the pod machine I bought them, one button, for instant mediocre gratification. I preferred the process. I pulled the bag of Colombian huila beans from the freezer. I measured exactly 20 grams. I tipped them into the grinder. The sound of the beans cracking apart was sharp in the stillness of the apartment, violent necessary. I boiled the water to exactly 200 degrees. I poured it over the grounds in the pour-over cone. I watched the dark liquid drip slowly into the glass carafe. Drip, drip, drip. I thought about the years, the double shifts at the port in 1981, when the winter wind off the Atlantic was so bitter it cut through your coat like a blade. I worked 16 hours a day for 3 weeks straight to buy Dorothea that fur coat she had been wanting. She wore it twice, then told me it was too heavy. I thought about the time Darnell wrecked his first car, drunk. He drove into a parked van. I settled the damages. I hired the lawyer who kept it off his record. I sat across from him and told him to be better. He never said thank you. He asked whether his replacement car would be red or blue. I thought about Tiffany, the way she redecorated my living room without a word to me, the way she threw out my mother's quilt because she said it looked poverty-stricken. That quilt was hand-stitched by a woman who picked cotton so I could walk into a college classroom. Tiffany tossed it like it was a dish rag, and Dorothea let her. I poured the coffee into a simple black mug. I carried it out to the balcony. The wind was fierce up here, pulling at my shirt. I took a sip. Bitter, strong, hot. It tasted like truth. I looked down at the city spread below me. Somewhere out there at a place called the Indigo Lounge, my son was at that moment explaining to a manager why he couldn't settle his bill. Somewhere in a mansion in Hilton Head Island, my wife was probably reaching for her phone to order late-night delivery, not yet realizing her card was nothing more than a laminated rectangle. For 45 years, I was their father, their husband, their foundation, the roof above them and the ground beneath them. But to them, I was a utility, a light switch. You flip it and the light comes on. You don't thank the switch. You don't love it. You only take notice when it stops working. Well, the switch is off. I finished my coffee. I rinsed the mug and set it in the drying rack. I switched off the lights and walked to the bedroom, shed the tuxedo, and stretched out on the cool, crisp sheets. Tomorrow, the real war would begin. Tomorrow, the sun would rise on a different world, one where Reginald Colby was no longer a servant inside his own kingdom. I shut my eyes, and for the first time in 20 years, sleep found me the moment my head touched the pillow. While I sat in that quiet apartment drinking coffee that tasted like freedom, the battle for my home had already gotten underway. I still had access to the security cameras through a private server Desmond had configured years ago. I wasn't watching out of sentiment. I was watching because I needed to see what these people looked like when the mask came off, and what those high-definition screens showed me turned my blood to ice. It hadn't even been 24 hours since I walked out the door, and Tiffany was already erasing me. She didn't wait for the divorce papers to dry. She brought in a crew of movers, and they showed up at 8 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. I watched her standing in the middle of my living room, white silk robe cup of green tea, directing those workers like a foreman on a demolition job. She aimed a manicured finger at the wall above the fireplace. Up there hung a painting I had acquired in the historic East Side in 1984. An original piece by a local artist, the struggle and beauty of our ancestors rendered in bold, unapologetic color. It was vibrant and loud and full of history. It was the first thing I bought when I made my first million. Tiffany wrinkled her nose as though she'd caught a bad smell. She told the movers to get that thing off the wall. She called it aggressive. She said the colors clashed with her vision of a modern neutral sanctuary. I watched two men in blue work suits grab the frame without a shred of care. They weren't handling art. They were hauling debris. They dragged it out through the front door and leaned it against a dumpster in the driveway. Then she moved to the display cases. Inside were the tribal masks I had brought back from my travels to West Africa. Every one of them carried a story. Everyone represented a spirit protection wisdom connection to something older than any of us. Tiffany waved a dismissive hand. She told her husband Darnell that they looked spooky, said they had bad energy. She ordered the movers to box them up and put them in the garage or drop them at a thrift store, she didn't care which. In their place, she hung canvases that were entirely blank, except for maybe a single gray line or a pale beige circle. She swapped out my mahogany bookshelves for floating glass shelves that held nothing but decorative stones and plastic succulents. She was gutting the soul of the house. She was whitewashing my legacy. She was turning a home that breathed with history into a sterile waiting room. She wanted the prestige of the address, but she wanted to scrub away every trace of the black man who paid for it. It was a cultural eviction. Watching it play out on a glowing screen from miles away cut deeper than any financial loss. It felt like she was spitting on my father's grave. Dorothea came into the room around noon. She looked worn down. The adrenaline from the party had drained away, and the weight of reality was beginning to settle. She was in her dressing gown, clutching a mug of coffee. She stopped short when she saw the bare walls. Her eyes went to the empty space above the fireplace where the historic East Side painting used to hang. For just a moment, I saw a genuine flicker of pain move across her face. That painting was on the wall when we brought our babies home from the hospital. It was there through every Christmas and every birthday. It was woven into the fabric of our family. She asked Tiffany what had happened to the artwork. Her voice came out small and hesitant. Tiffany didn't bother looking up from her tablet where she was scrolling through listings for expensive Italian sofas. She told Dorothea they were rebranding the house, said they needed to elevate the aesthetic if they wanted to be featured in design publications. She said the old pieces were too heavy and depressing. Dorothea started to push back. She said that Reg had loved those masks, that they were valuable. But before the sentence was out of her mouth, Darnell stepped in. My son. The boy I raised to stand tall in his own heritage. He walked over and draped an arm around his mother's shoulders. It wasn't comfort, it was condescension. He spoke to her like she was a senile child. He told her to stop living in the past. He said, Mom, you are free now. Remember, you do not have to live in Dad's museum anymore. He told her Tiffany had a vision that she knew what was trending, that she was going to transform this place into a modern masterpiece. You want to be a modern woman, don't you? Stop clinging to that old junk. It makes the house smell like Granddad. I watched Dorothea shrink. She made herself physically smaller where she stood. She looked at her son and saw someone she didn't recognize. She looked at her daughter-in-law and saw someone who ruled this space now. But she said nothing. She gave a slow nod and lifted the mug to her lips. She had traded a husband who valued her for a son who talked down to her, and a daughter-in-law who merely tolerated her presence. She drifted over to the new white sofa Tiffany had just unwrapped and lowered herself onto it. She looked ill at ease. She looked like a visitor in her own home. It was beginning to dawn on her that when she signed those papers, she hadn't gained a voice. She had surrendered her only protector. The day wore on. They had lunch delivered from some upscale seafood place. They drank my wine. They laughed and sketched out renovations that would run into the hundreds of thousands. They talked about taking down walls and putting a yoga studio in the garden, spending money they didn't have on a future that wasn't coming. And then at exactly 7 o'clock in the evening, the house pushed back. The sun had gone down. The rooms were bathed in the soft glow of the recessed lighting I'd had installed just the year before. Tiffany was mid-sentence about replacing the kitchen countertops with imported marble. Then came a sharp click that rang through the hallway. Then another, and then darkness, absolute total darkness, swallowed every room at once. The lights went dead. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The music flowing through the surround sound system cut off without warning. The only light left came from the screens of their phones, casting cold blue shadows across their bewildered faces. Tiffany let out a scream. She demanded to know what was happening. Darnell fumbled with his phone and switched on the flashlight, sweeping the beam around the room. "Must be a fuse," he said. He told Garrett to go check the breaker box in the basement. But it wasn't just the lights. The house was shutting down. The smart thermostat that held the temperature at a steady 72 degrees went dark. The electronic door locks beeped a low warning signal, signaling that they'd switched to backup battery. Out back, the quiet burbling of the heated pool went silent as the pumps cut off. The quiet was absolute. November in Hilton. Head Island offers no mercy. With the heating system down, the cold coming off, the water starts pressing through the walls fast. Within 30 minutes, the temperature inside had started to fall. The luxury estate was becoming a stone box. Garrett came pounding back up from the basement, looking rattled. He said the breakers were fine, every switch in the on position. He'd checked the main meter out front and found it locked with a red tag hanging off it. He held it up. A disconnect notice from the power company. Tiffany grabbed it from his hand and read it aloud. Service suspended due to request by account holder. Final bill outstanding. Reconnection fee required immediately. She screamed my name. She threw the tag at the floor. She said I had done this on purpose, called me a petty old man, then turned on Darnell and told him to fix it, to call the power company this instant and demand they restore service. Darnell dialed the number printed on the tag and put the call on speaker. The automated voice was cheerful and unhurried. It informed them that the account ending in 402 had been closed. To restore service, a new account would need to be opened with a deposit of $500, required along with immediate payment of the outstanding balance on the high-voltage pool heating system. Total amount, due $4,300. The room went silent again. $4,300. To me, that was a routine business expense. To them, in that moment, standing in the dark with their phones dying, it was a mountain. Darnell looked at Tiffany. Tiffany looked at Garrett. Garrett studied the ceiling. Darnell cleared his throat. He turned to his brother-in-law. He said, "Garrett, you're the finance guy. Put it on your card. We'll wire you the money Monday once the bank transfers go through." That was the moment the first hairline fracture in the alliance. Garrett took a step back. A nervous laugh came out of him. His hands went to his pockets, patting around, as if hunting for a wallet he already knew wasn't there. "Honestly, Dell, I'd love to help, but my cards are maxed right now. Because of that investment property I picked up in Savannah, all my liquidity is locked up in assets. I literally don't have $4,000 in available credit. I thought you guys were the ones sitting on the inheritance. I thought Reg left you everything." Rochelle chimed in, her voice climbing high and sharp in the darkness. "Why do we have to pay? This is Mom's house. Mom should pay." Every set of eyes swung to Dorothea. She was huddled in the dark, shivering inside that thin silk robe handbag clutched against her chest. She dug into it and produced her credit card, the platinum Visa she'd been using freely for 20 years without once checking the limit. She passed it to Darnell. "Just pay it," she said. "I don't want to freeze to death." Darnell read the numbers out to the operator. Then came a pause that stretched out like something terrible. Then the automated voice returned. "We're sorry, the transaction has been declined by the issuer. Please provide an alternative payment method." Darnell looked at the phone. He looked at his mother. "Mom, the card's dead. Dad must have killed it." Tiffany made a sound of raw frustration and drove her palm against the wall. "This is insane. We're sitting inside a $5 million mansion and we can't even get the lights on. Somebody has to have cash." They turned out their pockets. Between the four of them, there was less than $200. Designer clothing, expensive timepieces, luxury vehicles sitting out in the driveway, and not enough cash among them to keep a single light burning through the night. They ended up in the living room, wrapped in the same blankets Tiffany had tried to throw out earlier. They lit the decorative candles Tiffany had purchased purely for their visual appeal. The flickering light didn't make the room feel romantic. It made it look like a seance for a family that had already ceased to exist. I switched off the monitor in my apartment. I had seen enough. They were cold, they were rattled, and for the first time in their lives, they were beginning to grasp something fundamental. The life they believed was their birthright was not a natural condition. It was a product I had manufactured, and I had just canceled the subscription. Monday morning at the Hilton Head Island estate didn't arrive with any sense of fresh start. It arrived with the gray pressing weight of a hangover that had nothing to do with alcohol and everything to do with consequences. The house was technically warm again. Darnell had bled his emergency savings dry to pay the power company, but the atmosphere inside remained glacial. The four of them perched around the kitchen island, picking through dry toast and instant coffee because not one of them had thought to grocery shop. The silence sat between them like something solid. They weren't a family anymore. They were four frightened people in a lifeboat, beginning to realize the water supply wouldn't stretch far enough. At exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, the heavy brass knocker at the front door struck 3 times. Not the soft tap of a visitor. The deliberate, authoritative knock of official business. Darnell flinched. He stared at the door with something close to dread. In the past 48 hours, every time the outside world made contact, it had cost them. He dragged himself to the door. Through my security feed, I watched him open it. A courier stood on the step, holding a thick, rigid envelope trimmed with red stripes along the border. It required a signature. Darnell's hand shook as he signed. The courier didn't offer a word or a smile. He handed over the package and turned away, leaving my son standing there holding a device that was already counting down. Darnell carried it back into the kitchen and laid it on the marble countertop. The return address was printed in heavy black ink. The City Historical Preservation Commission. Below it, a second stamp, the Internal Revenue Service Department of Property Taxation. Dorothea set her coffee mug down. Her hands were unsteady. She asked what it was. Darnell didn't answer. He tore the envelope open, pulled out a thick stack of stapled documents. The paper had weight to it, the kind reserved for lawsuits and levies. He started reading. His eyes moved across the first page. Then they went wide. His mouth fell open without producing a sound. He sank onto the bar stool as though his legs had simply given out beneath him. Tiffany pulled the papers from his grip. She was impatient. She was certain of herself. She skimmed the document. Then she screamed. Not fear, disbelief. She flung the papers down on the island, scattering toast crumbs in every direction. She said it was impossible. She said they were making it up. Rochelle gathered up the documents and began reading aloud. Her voice started steady, then climbed higher and sharper with every line. The letter was a notice of violation, a severe one. It stated that the property located at 14 Cordillo Parkway was designated a Class A cultural landmark on account of its distinctive mid-century architecture and its historical significance as one of the first African-American-owned estates in the district. This designation had granted the property a special tax exemption that reduced the annual property tax bill by 80%. Rochelle paused. She looked at Tiffany. Her eyes had narrowed to slits. She kept reading. The exemption, the letter explained, was contingent on strict preservation of the property's exterior facade and the maintenance of specific interior cultural artifacts, cataloged as part of the heritage site. Then came the infractions. An inspector had come by that morning. He had seen the pile of mahogany window frames in the dumpster. He had watched contractors sandblasting the original brick to paint it white. He had seen movers carrying out the tribal masks and the historic East Side Renaissance paintings, items listed as protected fixtures of the estate. The letter was precise and merciless. By altering the facade and removing protected artifacts, the owners had breached the preservation agreement. The tax exemption was immediately revoked. Not only for the current year, the violation had triggered a retroactive penalty clause. They owed back taxes for the last 5 years, plus a penalty for the destruction of historical property. Rochelle turned to the final page. The figure was printed in bold at the bottom. Total amount due immediately to avoid liens and seizure, $45,842. That number hung in the room like smoke. $45,000. Tiffany stared at the page. She shook her head. She said she was only trying to modernize it. She said she'd wanted a farmhouse aesthetic. She said brick was ugly and those masks were creepy. She said she was improving the property value. Rochelle's hand came down on the counter like a gunshot. She turned on Tiffany with a fury that had been building since long before that morning. Rochelle had never forgiven Tiffany for the way she'd walked into this family and acted as if she'd always owned it. She'd resented how Reg and Dorothea had fawned over her. But now the restraint was gone. Rochelle screamed that Tiffany was an ignorant cultural colonizer who thought she could paint over an entire history with a bucket of beige. She got right in Tiffany's face. "Do you understand what you did?" Dad spent 30 years protecting that designation. He kept every brick and every painting exactly in place, so we wouldn't be writing a $50,000 check every year in taxes. He knew the rules. He played by them. And you came in here with your Pinterest board and your arrogance and blew the whole thing up in 24 hours. Tiffany recoiled. Tears began pooling in her eyes. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of manipulation. She looked to Darnell. She looked to Dorothea. She cried out that she was being attacked. She said she hadn't known. She said no one had told her. She said Reg must have known. She said Reg had set her up. She screamed that Reg had known she wanted to renovate and had deliberately let her do it so this would play out exactly this way. She tried to reframe the whole thing. She tried to cast herself as the victim of a calculated trap laid by a vindictive old man. Rochelle wasn't having it. She moved closer to Tiffany, right into her space. She hissed that this was not Reggie's fault. Reg was gone. This was Tiffany's fault. Because Tiffany never asked. Tiffany never read the deeds. Tiffany never respected the house. She saw it only as a backdrop for her social media content. Rochelle snatched the letter and thrust it in Tiffany's face. She demanded to know where they were going to find $45,000. She asked whether Tiffany had that kind of money sitting in her trust fund. Tiffany went quiet. Everyone in the room knew she had no trust fund. What she had was a maxed-out credit card and a leased Range Rover that was already scheduled for repossession. Dorothea buried her face in her hands. She started to sob. It was a low, mournful sound. The realization was settling in the fortune she believed she'd inherited was really a fortress of debt held together by Reggie's intelligence. With Reg gone, the walls were giving way. She looked at her children. She watched them tear each other apart. She saw the hatred burning in Rochelle's eyes. She saw the stupidity plain in Tiffany's. And she saw the weakness in Darnell's eyes as he stood there mute, motionless, just watching his wife and sister savage one another. Darnell tried to step in. He touched Rochelle's arm. He told her to calm down, said they would figure something out, said they could appeal the ruling, said maybe they could get the paintings put back. Rochelle laughed. It was a bitter, ugly sound. She told Darnell to wake up, said the inspector had already photographed everything. The violation was on record. The bill had been issued. The government doesn't accept IOU notes. She told Darnell he was every bit as foolish as his wife. She told him he was the man of the house now, and it was on him to fix it. Darnell looked at the bill. He looked at his mother. He looked at his wife. And he understood he could not fix it. He had no idea how to appeal a tax ruling. He didn't know the first thing about negotiating with the Heritage Commission. He didn't have $45,000. He barely had $45. I watched all of it from my leather armchair back in the city. The image on my iPad was sharp and clear. I had a glass of chilled Cabernet Sauvignon in my hand, even though it was barely noon. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The wine was dry and layered with notes of black currant. It tasted like victory. I zoomed in on the screen. I studied Tiffany's face. Mascara was streaming down her cheeks. The arrogance had drained away, replaced by raw panic. I looked at Rochelle's face. It was twisted with greed and fear in equal measure. Then I looked at Darnell. He looked like a lost child waiting for his father to walk through the door and set everything right. But I wasn't walking through any door. Tiffany had been right about one thing. I did know. I knew the moment I walked out, she would move to change that house. I knew she despised the history that building carried. I knew she felt threatened by the black excellence that estate represented. I knew her ego would push her to paint over it, to erase it, to make it look like every other McMansion in the Hamptons. I could have warned her. I could have left a note, "Do not touch the brickwork." I could have walked them through the tax code. But why would I? They'd told everyone they were smarter than me. They said I was controlling. They said I was the thing holding them back. So I stepped aside. I handed them the freedom to make their own choices. And just as I'd known they would, their first choice was to dismantle their own safety net. They thought the wealth lived in the house itself. They never grasped that the wealth came from how that house was managed. They wanted the kingdom without any appetite for the crown's responsibilities. Now the tax collector was at the gate and the treasury was bare. I watched Rochelle hurl the papers at Darnell. I watched Tiffany flee the room in tears. I watched Dorothea stare blankly at the wall as her comfortable retirement dissolved before her eyes. I closed the cover of my iPad. The screen went dark. I set the wine glass on the table. A deep, settled calm came over me. This was only the beginning. The tax bill was just the first domino to fall. They were frantic over $45,000. They had no idea that tomorrow the bank would be calling about the $800,000. I stood and crossed to the window. The city below churned with noise and motion, but up here it was still. I was alone, but for the first time in 45 years, I wasn't lonely. I was vindicated. I spoke to the empty room, my voice low and even. Welcome to the real world. Tuition is expensive and payment is due in full. While I was sipping my wine and watching the chaos play out at the house, my son Darnell was waking up to a different kind of headache. He'd spent the night convinced that even with the tax bill hanging over him, he still held an ace. He had the family business Colby Logistics, the company I'd built from a single delivery van into a fleet moving freight across the entire tri-state area. Darnell had always grumbled that I micromanaged the operation. He told anyone willing to listen that if he were running things, profits would double. He called me too conservative too, set in my ways. Well, today was his first morning as sole captain of the ship. I pulled up the feed from the office security cameras. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. The elevator doors slid open on the 12th floor of the downtown building. Darnell stepped out. He looked like he'd walked off the page of a business magazine. Custom navy, three-piece suit, silk tie that probably cost more than a driver earns in a week. He was carrying a leather briefcase I knew for a fact was empty. He'd never done any actual work to fill it. He adjusted his cufflinks and checked his reflection in the glass door. He was rehearsing his expression. He wanted to project sternness. He wanted to look authoritative. He was going to stride in there and demand a budget review. He was going to fire the operations manager just to make clear who was in charge. He had a whole speech prepared about synergy and modernization. He swiped his keycard with a flourish and pushed through the heavy glass doors, ready to receive his subjects' admiration. But there was no applause, no bustle of activity, no phones ringing, no keyboards clattering, no dispatchers barking orders at drivers. There was only silence. Darnell walked into the main bullpen, a wide-open floor that normally held 20 desks, logistics coordinators, customer service reps, the whole engine of the operation. Today it was a ghost town. The desks were still there, but stripped bare. No family photos, no coffee mugs, no stacks of waybills. Just empty laminate surfaces gathering dust. He stopped in the middle of the room. He turned a slow circle. He had the look of a man who'd walked onto a stage after the audience had already gone home. He called out, "Hello!" His voice bounced off the walls. It sounded small and hollow. He moved to the office of the operations manager, Mrs. Caldwell. She had been with me for 15 years. She ran the floor with an iron fist. Her office was cleared out. Her nameplate was gone from the door. He rushed to the dispatch room, the beating heart of the company. The screens that usually tracked every truck in the fleet were dark. The headsets were unplugged, placed neatly on the chairs. Darnell yanked out his phone. He started dialing frantically. I knew exactly who he was trying to reach. The drivers, the warehouse managers. Nobody picked up. What Darnell never understood was that Colby Logistics wasn't a collection of trucks and desks. It was a web of relationships, built on trust, built on the understanding that when Reg Colby gave his word, the work got done and the people got paid. Last week when I decided to execute Protocol Zero, I called a meeting not with my family, but with my employees. I told them the truth. I told them I was stepping away and that my son would be taking the helm. I saw the fear move through the room. They knew Darnell. They knew he was lazy and incompetent. They knew he'd run that company into the ground inside a month. So I gave them a choice. I told them my old friend who runs a rival logistics firm was looking to grow. I told them I'd already worked out an arrangement. Anyone who wanted to leave could move to the new company with a 10% raise and full benefits starting Monday morning. Every single one of them signed the resignation letter. Every single one chose to follow my word rather than serve my son. Darnell stood in the center of that vacant office. He was king of nothing. He had the title he'd always hungered for. He was the CEO. But a CEO without a team is just a man in a suit occupying an expensive room. He rushed into my old office, which he'd already claimed as his own. He dropped into the mahogany chair. He flipped open the laptop. He tried to get into the company bank accounts. Access denied. He tried pulling up the client database. File not found. I hadn't deleted a thing. That would have been illegal, but the passwords were my intellectual property, and I was the only soul who held them. He was hyperventilating. He was clawing at his tie. He was soaking through that costly custom shirt. It was dawning on him that cargo was sitting idle on docks with nobody to move it. Clients were dialing numbers that rang out into an empty room. Contracts were being breached with every passing minute. The lawsuits for non-delivery would begin landing by afternoon. And then the door opened. Darnell looked up, desperate for an employee, for anyone who might pull him back from the ledge. But it wasn't an employee. It was Mr. Beaumont, the building's owner. Mr. Beaumont was not a man who had any interest in family drama. He cared about rent per square foot. He walked in not with a smile, but with a clipboard. He swept his eyes around the empty floor. He looked at Darnell sweating behind the big desk. He didn't appear surprised. He looked annoyed. He walked straight up to the desk without offering a handshake and set a document down in front of Darnell. "Mr. Colby," he said, "I see you are downsizing." Darnell stumbled over his words. He said it was just a restructuring. He said the team was on a retreat. He reached for every buzzword he'd picked up in business school. Mr. Beaumont cut him off. "I don't care if they're on the moon," he said. "I care about the lease. Your father came to see me last week. He informed me he has formally stepped down from the company and removed himself as the guarantor of this lease." Darnell went pale. "So what?" he said. "The company pays the rent." Mr. Beaumont leaned forward and placed both palms flat on the desk. "Let's be clear," he said. "The company is an entity, but last year when you insisted on being named managing director, you also insisted on signing the lease renewal yourself. You said you wanted to build credit. You said you wanted your name on the door. Do you remember that?" I remembered it perfectly. Darnell had thrown a tantrum. He'd declared he refused to live in my shadow. He wanted his name on the legal documents. So I let him sign. I knew this day was coming. Mr. Beaumont tapped the paper. "Rent was due on the 1st, he said. "It is the 5th. We have a strict late payment policy. The monthly rent for this floor is $20,000 plus late fees. That brings the total to $21,500. Darnell let out a nervous laugh. He said they'd get it, said the company had money. Mr. Beaumont shook his head. "I just spoke to the bank," he said. "The company account is frozen due to a shareholder dispute, which means any check bounces back to the personal guarantor. That is you, Darnell. I want a cashier's check by 5 p.m. today. If I don't have it, I will lock these doors and sue you personally for the balance of the 3-year lease. That comes to roughly $700,000. Do you have $700,000, Mr. Colby, COAs? Darnell couldn't form a word. He felt the walls pressing in. The city skyline view that usually made him feel invincible now looked like a cliff edge he was about to go over. Mr. Beaumont straightened his tie. 5:00 p.m., he said. Tick-tock. He turned and walked out. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind him. The sound landed like a gavel. Darnell was alone. Truly alone. He stared at the phone on the desk. He looked at the empty chairs arranged around him. It hit him his whole life he had been playing at business. He'd been a child sitting in the cockpit while his father flew the plane. He thought he was flying because his hands were on the yoke. But now the pilot was gone. The autopilot was off and the ground was rising fast. He sank back in the chair. The leather squeaked. He lowered his head to the desk and let the cold wood press against his forehead. He began to cry. Not the furious tears of a wronged man, but the terrified tears of a boy who has just understood that the world is hard and unforgiving, and he has no idea at all how to survive in it. He knew nothing about logistics. He knew nothing about payroll. He knew nothing about leading people. He was a fraud. And for the first time in 32 years, the mirror was showing him precisely who he was. A man with an empty briefcase and an empty head sitting in an empty room waiting for the end. While Darnell was weeping in his vacant office, Dorothea was about to face her own public execution. For 20 years, my wife had a routine. Every Tuesday at 11, she drove to the gourmet market on Main Street. She didn't shop for groceries the way ordinary people do. She curated them. She moved through those upscale aisles like a queen inspecting her colony. She bought imported truffles, aged balsamic vinegar cuts of meat that ran more than a car payment. It was her stage. It was where she demonstrated to the other wives in Hilton Head Island that the Colby family was untouchable. I watched the GPS tracker on her Mercedes dashboard. She was heading to the market. She was fighting to keep some semblance of normalcy. She was trying to convince herself that her husband hadn't left, that her son wasn't in freefall, that her house wasn't a freezing tax liability. She walked into the store in her oversized sunglasses and cashmere coat. She took a basket. She filled it with comfort, but not just any comfort. She pulled out lobster bisque, a bottle of Domaine, and a tin of caviar. She was trying to eat her way through her feelings, except she'd forgotten she no longer had the funds to cover the meal. She stepped up to the register. The cashier was a woman named Lorinda, who had known us for 15 years. Lorinda smiled and began scanning the items. The total came to $412. Dorothea didn't glance at the screen. She reached into her purse and drew out the Platinum Visa, the heavy metal card that had been her magic wand for 2 decades. She tapped it on the reader. Beep. The machine produced a low, dissonant tone. Dorothea frowned. She tapped it again harder. Beep. Lorinda studied the screen. She dropped her voice to a near whisper, trying to spare her the embarrassment. Mrs. Colby, she said, "It's saying do not honor. Do you have another card you'd like to try?" Dorothea laughed. It was a high, brittle sound. "That's ridiculous," she said. "My husband must have forgotten to pay the bill. Try it again, Lorinda." Lorinda ran it again. This time the machine was louder. Declined. The people queued behind her began to shift and shuffle. A woman in a tennis outfit sighed audibly and checked her watch. The shame crept up Dorothea's neck, starting as a pale flush and deepening to crimson. She dug through her purse. She produced the backup MasterCard. Declined. She pulled out the American Express. Declined. I had been thorough. I hadn't merely cut the cards. I'd contacted the credit bureaus and placed a fraud alert on our joint Social Security profiles. Every line of credit bearing my name was locked down tighter than Fort Knox. Dorothea stood there with a basket full of luxuries she could no longer afford. She looked at Lorinda. Lorinda looked back with pity. That was the worst of it. Not anger, pity. The queen had lost her crown. Dorothea had to make a choice. She could set down the basket and walk out with her chin up, or she could beg. She chose a humiliating middle ground. She opened her wallet and counted what cash she had. $42. She began pulling items back out of the basket one by one. Back went the champagne. Back went the lobster. Back went the caviar. Back went the organic vegetables. She kept a box of store-brand pasta, a jar of generic sauce, and a carton of milk. The woman directly behind her leaned in. "Excuse me, Mrs. Colby," she said. "Do you need some help?" It was a neighbor, a woman Dorothea had been boasting to just last week about our upcoming trip to Europe. Dorothea shook her head sharply. She grabbed her meager little bag of groceries. She didn't wait for the receipt. She walked out of that store at a near run. She sat in her car for 10 minutes. I could see her through the Mercedes's interior camera. She wasn't crying. She was staring at the steering wheel, gripping it so hard her knuckles had gone white. The realization was settling over her without Reginald Colby. She was not the queen of Hilton Head Island. She was just an older woman with $42 and a box of dry pasta. That night dinner at the mansion was a grim affair. The dining room was too cold to use, so they gathered in the kitchen again. The grand marble island was set not with a feast, but with bowls of boiled pasta and watery sauce. No wine, no laughter. Tiffany sat on a stool wearing a hoodie, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She was scrolling her phone, furiously deleting comments. The backlash from her video was getting worse by the hour. People were calling her a gold digger, calling her abusive. She needed a distraction. She needed a win. She looked up from her screen and fixed her gaze on Dorothea. She didn't say thank you for the food. She didn't ask how Dorothea's day had been. She simply said, "We need to switch rooms." Dorothea looked up from her bowl. "What do you mean?" she asked. Tiffany set her phone down. She switched into her business voice, the same one she used whenever she was trying to get me to fund her failed podcast. "Look, Dorothea, we have to be practical," she said. "Darnell and I are the future of this family. We are the ones who are going to bring in the money to dig us out of this mess. I'm pivoting my content strategy. I'm launching a new series about home renovation. I need good light. I need room for my equipment. The master suite has the bay windows. It has the southern exposure." Dorothea stopped eating. She set her fork down. The master suite wasn't merely a room. It was the sanctuary I had built for her. It held the fireplace she loved. It had the soaking tub where she read her books. It was the room where we had whispered our dreams to each other across 30 years. It was the only corner of that house that still felt like mine. "No," she said. "That is my room. That is where I slept with my husband. You have the guest wing. It is enormous. Tiffany rolled her eyes. "The guest wing faces north," she said. "The light is terrible. It makes me look gray. Besides, Dorothea, be reasonable. You are one person. You are 70 years old. You do not need 1,000 square feet and a walk-in closet the size of a studio apartment. That's wasted space. Darnell and I are a couple. We need room to breathe. We need room to create." Tiffany turned to Darnell. She kicked him under the table. The look she gave him said, "Speak up or else." This was the moment. This was the test. A son is supposed to protect his mother. A son is supposed to honor the woman who brought him into the world. But Darnell was not a man. He was a frightened boy trapped inside a man's body. And he was terrified of his wife. He couldn't bring himself to meet his mother's eyes. He stared into his bowl of pasta and mumbled, "Well, Mom, she does have a point. You're in there all by yourself. It does seem a little selfish to hold on to the best room when you're only sleeping in it. Tiffany is trying to work. She is trying to save us. Maybe you could move down to the downstairs suite." The downstairs suite. He was referring to the housekeeper's quarters, a small room behind the kitchen. It had one narrow window that looked out onto the driveway. It was cold. It carried the smell of cleaning supplies. It was a room built for servants. Dorothea looked at her son. Her voice trembled. "Darnell, are you serious?" she said. "You are putting me out of my own bedroom. You are moving me into the maid's room, in my own house." Darnell finally looked up. His eyes were hard, not because he was strong, but because he was on the defensive. "Stop being so dramatic, Mom," he snapped. "God, why does everything have to be so difficult with you? Dad is gone. He's not coming back. We have to make changes. If you want to keep living here, you have to compromise. We are the ones paying the electricity bill. We are the ones carrying the stress. The least you can do is get out of the way. Get out of the way." Those words struck Dorothea harder than the divorce papers ever had. She had spent her entire life getting out of the way. She got out of the way so Darnell could shine. She got out of the way so Rochelle could be happy. She got out of the way so Reg could work. And her reward for all of it was a bowl of cheap pasta and an eviction notice delivered by her own son. Tiffany clapped her hands together. "Great," she said. "It's settled. We'll move your things tonight. I want to start painting first thing tomorrow morning." They didn't wait. They didn't give her any time to pack with dignity. Tiffany and Darnell marched upstairs. I watched on the bedroom camera as they began yanking Dorothea's clothes from the closet. They threw her silk blouses on the floor. They swept her perfume bottles into a cardboard box. They handled the pieces of her life like garbage that needed to be cleared out. Dorothea stood in the doorway. She didn't scream. She didn't fight back. She was in shock. She watched Tiffany strip the sheets from the bed, the Egyptian cotton sheets I had bought, balling them up and tossing them into the hallway, saying they smelled like old people. By midnight it was done. Dorothea was sitting on the edge of a twin mattress in the housekeeper's room. The room was freezing. The heating vent down there had never worked properly, and I had never fixed it because no one had ever lived there. Wind rattled the thin window pane. She drew her knees up to her chest. She wrapped her cashmere coat around her because there were no spare blankets. She looked around the small, cramped space. A single lamp threw a yellow, depressing light across the walls. For the first time since the party, Dorothea wept, but not for herself. She cried for what she had lost. She closed her eyes, and she remembered. She remembered a night 5 years ago. She'd had the flu. She was miserable. I came home early from work. I didn't send a nurse. I came upstairs myself. I made her soup from scratch. I sat at the edge of the bed and read to her for hours until she drifted off to sleep. I warmed her towels in the dryer so her face wouldn't be cold when she washed up. I treated her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. She had thrown all of that away. She had listened to her children when they told her she was a victim. They told her I was controlling. They told her I was holding her back. She stared at the peeling paint on the maid's room wall, and she understood the truth. I was never her jailer. I was her shield. I was the wall standing between her and the cold indifference of the world. I was the one who made sure she never had to think about the price of milk or whether a room was warm enough. And she had let me go. She heard footsteps overhead, heavy thuds, then laughter. Tiffany and Darnell were already celebrating. They'd found a bottle of wine hidden in the back of a cabinet and were toasting to their new room. Dorothea curled up on the small bed. She was shivering. She was hungry. She was alone in a house full of people. She whispered my name into the dark, Reg, but I wasn't there. And for the first time in 45 years, she understood that no one was coming to save her. She had burned the bridge. Now she had to drown in the river she had made. The sun rose over the Hilton Head Island estate on Wednesday morning, but it brought no warmth to the woman sleeping in the servants' quarters. Dorothea woke with a stiff neck and a soul that felt bruised. For 40 years she had woken up in a king-size bed with 400 thread-count sheets and the scent of fresh coffee I had brewed. Now she woke to the smell of lemon pledge and a dripping faucet. She walked into the kitchen hoping for a kind word from her children. Instead, she found a war council. Garrett was at the island scrolling his phone with a manic, restless energy. His eyes were bloodshot. He had spent the night hunting for quick loans and coming up empty. When he saw Dorothea shuffle in, wearing her wrinkled robe, he didn't see a mother in distress. He saw a weapon. He saw the last card in the deck that hadn't been played yet. He stood up and crossed the room toward her. He placed his hands on her shoulders. He used his softest voice, the voice of a salesman, working to close a deal on a house with a leaking roof. "Dorothea," he said, "you look terrible. You look pale. Are you feeling all right?" What is coming next changed everything, and not in any way they saw arriving. "Before we get there, I want to ask you something. If someone close to you had been quietly working against you all along, would you confront them the moment you found out? Or would you wait and let the truth do its own damage?" Dorothea blinked. She said she had a headache. She said she was stressed. Garrett nodded slowly. He looked at Rochelle and Darnell. He waved them closer. "Guys, look at her," he said. "Dad might hate us. Dad might hate me. But he loves Mom. He spent half a century worshiping the ground she walks on. If he thought she was sick, if he believed she was dying, he would drop the lawsuit. He would unfreeze the accounts. He would be here in 10 minutes with his checkbook open." Darnell frowned. "But she's not dying, Garrett," he said. "She just has a headache." Garrett smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. "Perception is reality, Darnell," he said. "We don't need an actual stroke. We just need the symptoms of one. We call Reggie. We tell him Mom collapsed. We tell him her speech is slurred. We get her to the emergency room. Once he's standing there watching her hooked up to machines, his guilt takes over. He'll sign anything to make sure she's all right." I watched Dorothea's face. I expected her to slap him. I expected her to say she would never sink low enough to fake a medical emergency to manipulate the man she had loved. But poverty does strange things to people, and the fear of it does worse. Dorothea looked at the empty refrigerator. She looked at the maid's room door, and she slowly nodded. She agreed to pretend to die so they could live. The performance started at 10 o'clock. They staged the living room like a film set. Rochelle dragged a chair out of position to make it look like it had been knocked over. Garrett pulled up a YouTube video on the surround sound system, 10 hours of ambulance siren effects. He set the volume just high enough to bleed through in the background. Rochelle dialed my number. I was in my city office reviewing the liquidation of the trust fund. The phone rang. I picked up on the second ring. Rochelle didn't say hello. She screamed. She screamed with a theatrical panic that might have impressed me if it weren't so repulsive. "Dad, come quick!" she cried. "It's Mom! She collapsed in the kitchen. She won't wake up." Her face is drooping. "Dad, I think it's a stroke. The ambulance is here. We're going to Beaufort Memorial Hospital. Please, Dad, she's asking for you." I listened to the sirens wailing in the background. I listened to my daughter sobbing. I listened to the silence of my wife, who was supposedly unconscious on the floor. For a split second, my heart seized. 45 years of instinct came surging up. My body wanted to bolt to the car. My body wanted to tear down the highway to reach her. But my mind is a steel trap, and my mind caught two things immediately. First, the sirens in the background were looping. The same distinct horn pattern repeated every 10 seconds. Second, if the ambulance was already there, why was Rochelle on the phone with me instead of with the paramedics? Where were the EMTs shouting instructions? I didn't ask a single question. I simply said, "I'll handle it," and I hung up. I did not drive to the hospital. I called Desmond Fairweather. I told him to meet me at Beaufort Memorial's emergency room and to bring Dr. Parrish. Dr. Parrish is a forensic pathologist who consults for my insurance company. He is a man who can detect a lie by the dilation of a pupil. I pulled into the hospital parking lot 40 minutes later. I did not go inside. I sat in my tinted Cadillac and watched. I watched my family's car speed into the emergency bay. I watched Darnell and Garrett carry Dorothea out of the vehicle. She was limp. Her eyes were shut. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. They rushed her through the doors, calling out for help. 10 minutes later, Desmond Fairweather arrived in his black sedan. Dr. Parrish was with him carrying a medical briefcase. They walked through the ER entrance with the bearing of executioners. Inside the waiting room, the scene was set. Rochelle was pacing, crying into a tissue. Darnell sat with his head in his hands. Garrett was moving back and forth, checking his watch, waiting for the wealthy savior to come through the door. When the automatic doors slid open, they all looked up. Hope lit their faces and died the instant they saw. It was not Reg Colby. It was the lawyer who had frozen their accounts. Desmond walked straight over to them. He offered no comfort. He didn't ask how she was doing. He set his briefcase on the table. "Mr. Colby has authorized me to oversee this situation," he said. As Mr. Colby is the primary policyholder for Mrs. Colby's medical insurance, he has the right to verify the necessity of any emergency procedures. Garrett shot to his feet. His face was flushed. "Get the hell out of here," he snapped. "My mother-in-law is dying in there. We don't need a lawyer. We need her husband. Where is Reg?" Desmond adjusted his glasses. "Reg is devastated," he said. "He is so devastated that he wants to ensure Dorothea receives the absolute best care. That is why he sent Dr. Parrish. Dr. Parrish is an independent medical examiner. He is going to go into that room and verify the diagnosis. If Dorothea is in fact having a stroke, Regi will authorize a transfer to the finest neurological facility in the country. He will cover everything." The family exchanged a glance of relief. They thought they had won. They thought they had outmaneuvered me. But Desmond continued. His voice dropped an octave. It turned dangerous. "However, I am obligated to warn you. Insurance fraud is a federal felony. Filing a false medical claim to extract financial concessions is a crime punishable by up to 10 years in prison. If Dr. Parrish enters that room and finds Mrs. Colby to be medically stable, if he finds she is feigning symptoms, we will not only deny coverage for the hospital bill, which will run roughly $5,000 for an emergency admission. We will also file immediate criminal charges against every person who took part in this conspiracy." The air went out of the room. Rochelle stopped crying. Darnell turned pale. Garrett looked as though he might be sick. They all knew Dorothea was fine. They knew a real physician would see through the act in 5 seconds. Desmond turned to Dr. Parrish. "Doctor, please proceed to the trauma room." Dr. Parrish nodded and moved toward the swinging doors. Panic set in. Pure, unfiltered panic. Garrett ran after him. He grabbed his arm. Wait, he stammered. "You can't just go in there. It's private." Desmond stepped between them. "Mr. Colby holds power of attorney over the insurance policy," he said. "We have every right, unless of course you wish to withdraw the claim right now, unless you would like to acknowledge that this was all a mistake." At that moment, the treatment area doors swung open and a real ER doctor stepped out. He looked annoyed. He surveyed the family, then looked at Desmond. "Family of Dorothea Colby," he said. Rochelle stepped forward. Her voice was unsteady. "Is she okay?" The doctor peeled off his gloves and dropped them in the trash. "She is miraculously fine," he said. "Vitals are perfect. CT scan is clear. In fact, the moment I mentioned that we'd need to perform a spinal tap to check for bleeding, she made a sudden and complete recovery. She is sitting up, asking for a glass of water." He looked at them with undisguised contempt. "This is an emergency room. We have people dying of heart attacks. We have car accident victims bleeding out. And you people bring in a perfectly healthy woman and stage a stroke over some family drama." He pointed to the exit. "Get her out of here. Discharge her immediately and do not come back unless someone is actually bleeding. Security will escort you out." Desmond smiled. It was the only time I had ever seen him smile. He looked at Garrett. "I'll be informing Mr. Colby that his wife is in excellent health," he said. "I'll also be sending you the bill for Dr. Parrish's time. That comes to $1,000. Have a nice day." I watched from the car as they filed out. 5 minutes later, Dorothea was walking on her own. She was staring at the ground. She was humiliated. She had allowed her children to turn her into a liar. She had let them strip away her dignity. People in the parking lot watched them. They looked like a family that had just been caught stealing from the collection plate at church. They got into their car without a word. I shifted my car into gear. I did not feel happy. I did not feel triumphant. What I felt was a deep, heavy sadness. I understood then that my family was not merely greedy. They were broken. They had no moral compass left to speak of. They had no bottom. I drove away before they could spot me. I had one more stop to make the bank because tomorrow the real financial hammer was coming down. And after the day's performance, I had not a single reservation about letting it fall. Thursday morning settled over the estate in a silence that was heavy and suffocating. Not the peaceful quiet of a library, but the coiled stillness of a bomb squad, waiting for the timer to reach zero. The hospital humiliation had broken their spirit. The financial reality was about to break their backs. I was at my city office watching the security feed of the front porch. I knew the county sheriff's schedule better than I knew my own children. I knew that at exactly 9:15, a dark green patrol car would come rolling up the driveway. And there it was, punctual as death. A deputy climbed out. He mounted the stone steps with a heavy, deliberate stride. He did not ring the doorbell. He did not knock to see if anyone was home. He wasn't there for conversation. He pulled a staple gun from his belt. He pressed a bright orange piece of paper flat against the mahogany front door. Clack. The crack of metal staples driving into expensive wood rang through the house like gunshots. The deputy turned, walked back to his car, and left. Darnell pulled the front door open 10 seconds later. He was still in the same clothes he'd worn to the hospital. He stared at the orange paper. He tried to peel it away, but it tore, leaving jagged corners embedded in the wood. He read the bold black letters across the top. Notice of foreclosure proceedings. He dropped to his knees, literally. I watched my son, the man who fancied himself a king, crumble on his own doorstep. He cried out for his mother. It was a raw, primal sound. The family converged in the foyer. Dorothea came running from the maid's room. Tiffany appeared at the top of the stairs. Rochelle and Garrett emerged from the living room. They gathered around the paper, trembling in Darnell's hand. It was a notice from First National Bank. It stated that the property at 14 Cordillo Parkway was in default. It stated that the bank was initiating proceedings to seize the home and sell it at public auction to recover the outstanding debt. Tiffany snatched the paper. She was shaking. She yelled that it was a mistake. She said Reg had paid off the house 20 years ago. Said she'd seen the paperwork. Said the house was free and clear, worth $5 million. We own it. I took a sip of my espresso. Oh, Tiffany, you saw what I wanted you to see. You saw the asset. You never went looking for the liability. The truth was far more complicated and far more lethal. Yes, I had paid off the original mortgage in 1994, but 5 years ago when I began mapping my exit strategy, I took out a home equity loan, a massive one. I borrowed $800,000 against the value of the property. I used those funds to seed the startup capital for the offshore accounts that were now financing my new life. The house was not an asset. It was collateral. But here was the trap. Here was the clause Desmond and I had buried deep in the fine print of the loan agreement. It is called the due on sale clause. It is a standard provision in nearly every mortgage contract in America, and most people never read it. It states that if the property is sold or the title is transferred to a new owner, the lender has the right to demand immediate repayment of the entire loan balance. When Dorothea handed me the divorce papers, she demanded the house. She demanded the title be transferred solely into her name. I agreed. I signed the quitclaim deed on the hood of my car. That signature was the trigger. The moment the deed was recorded at the county clerk's office on Monday, the bank was notified. They saw that Reginald Colby was no longer the owner. They saw the new owner listed as Dorothea Colby. And since Dorothea Colby had no loan agreement with them, the bank exercised its right. They called the note. They were not interested in monthly payments. They were not interested in negotiating. They wanted $800,000, and they wanted it immediately. Darnell dialed the number on the foreclosure notice. He put it on speaker so everyone could hear. His hands were sweating so badly he nearly lost hold of the phone. A loan officer answered. Her voice was crisp, efficient, and completely without empathy. Darnell tried to work his charm. He said there must be some misunderstanding. He said his father had always kept the bills current. The loan officer cut him off. "Mr. Colby," she said, "we are well aware of the history. However, the title transfer recorded on Monday violated the terms of the mortgage. The loan is now due in full. The outstanding principal is $792,000 plus accrued interest and legal fees for the foreclosure filing. The total amount required to cure the default is $85,000. Darnell stammered. He asked whether they could simply resume monthly payments, said they could manage $2,000 a month. The loan officer laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Sir, this is not a negotiation," she said. "The contract has been breached. You have two options. You wire the full amount of $85,000 by close of business on Friday, or you vacate the premises so we can prepare the property for auction. If you do not vacate, the sheriff will return to remove you and your belongings by force. You have 48 hours. The line went dead. $800,000. That number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. They stood in the foyer of a mansion worth $5 million, but they couldn't touch a cent of that equity. To reach the equity, they'd need to sell the house. But they couldn't sell the house because the bank was already claiming it. And even if a quick sale were possible, the tax lien from the historical violation sat at $45,000. The early termination penalties on the leased cars were another $50,000. The credit card debt they had managed to stack up in 3 days was astronomical. They were not millionaires. They were destitute. They moved to the kitchen table, the same table that had witnessed their arrogance on Saturday. Now on Thursday, it witnessed their ruin. They began screaming at each other. The thin veneer of family solidarity dissolved. It was every rat for itself. Tiffany turned on Dorothea. Her face was contorted with fury. She screamed that this was Dorothea's fault. "You told us the house was paid off," she shouted. "You told us we were rich. You lied to us. You trapped us in this nightmare." Dorothea was weeping softly. "I thought it was," she said. "Reg never told me about the loan. Reg handled all the paperwork." Rochelle slammed her fist on the table. She yelled that Reg had played them all. She said he knew. He knew exactly what would happen. He handed us a grenade and walked out the door. Darnell put his face in his hands. "It doesn't matter whose fault it is," he said. "We are going to be homeless in 2 days. Where do we go? We have no money. We have no credit. We have no friends left in this town because Tiffany live-streamed our dirty laundry to the entire world." Tiffany stood up. She paced the room like a caged animal. "We have to sell something," she said. "We have to pawn something. There has to be something in this house worth real money." She looked around. The walls were bare. She had thrown away the art herself. The furniture was worn and wouldn't bring much. The cars were leased and already tagged for repossession. Then her eyes settled on Dorothea, on her hands, specifically on her left hand. Dorothea was still wearing her wedding ring, a 3-carat solitaire diamond. I had upgraded it for our 40th anniversary. Flawless. Worth at least $50,000. Tiffany pointed at the ring. "Give me that," she said. Dorothea covered her hand. She looked at Tiffany with horror. "No," she said. "This is my wedding ring. This is the last thing I have left." Tiffany lunged across the table. She seized Dorothea's wrist. "Give it to me, you old hag," she screamed. "You caused this. You pay for it. We can sell it. Buy ourselves a few more days. Get a hotel room." Darnell sat there and watched. He watched his wife assault his mother. He watched her claw at the ring finger. He did nothing. He was too hollowed out, too cowardly to step in. It was Rochelle who pulled Tiffany away. Not out of decency, out of calculation. She shoved Tiffany back and snapped, "Stop it. $50,000 won't save us. We need $800,000. The ring is a drop in the bucket. We need a miracle." The arguing ground on for hours. They went in circles. They blamed me. They blamed the bank. They blamed the government. They blamed each other. Not once did any of them pause to look in the mirror and own their greed. But while the loud ones raged, the quiet one was calculating. Garrett sat at the far end of the table. He hadn't uttered a single word since the loan officer ended the call. Garrett was carrying a secret none of the others knew about. He owed money not to a bank, but to a bookie in Biloxi. $30,000. And unlike a bank, a bookie doesn't dispatch a sheriff bearing paperwork. He sends a man carrying a baseball bat. Garrett watched the chaos unfold around him. He could see the ship going under, and there was only one life vest left. His eyes moved to Dorothea. They moved to the ring that Tiffany had failed to walk away with, but he knew there was more to be had. He recalled spotting Dorothea's jewelry box in the master bedroom back before she'd been pushed out to the maid's quarters. He knew she'd moved it downstairs. He knew precisely where it was. An antique mahogany box, velvet-lined. Inside sat 40 years' worth of gifts. The diamond tennis bracelet, the sapphire earrings from our trip to London, the heavy gold necklace from her 50th birthday. I had insured that box for $200,000. Garrett glanced at his wife Rochelle, who was screaming at her brother. He glanced at his mother-in-law, weeping. He glanced at the foreclosure notice lying on the table. His eyes went narrow. A darkness settled across his face. It was the expression of a man who has concluded that staying alive matters more than staying decent. He rose slowly. He excused himself without fanfare, mumbling something about needing the bathroom. Nobody looked up. Nobody cared. They were too deep in tearing each other to pieces. Garrett left the kitchen, but the bathroom was never his destination. He turned left into the hallway. He moved toward the maid's quarters. His footsteps made no sound on the hardwood. He reached the door to Dorothea's small room. He pushed it open. The room was dim. On the little dresser sat the mahogany box. It caught what little light there was and gleamed. To Garrett, it did not look like memories. It did not look like love. It looked like a getaway car. It looked like a plane ticket. It looked like freedom. He cast a glance back down the hallway. He could still hear the shouting from the kitchen. He stepped into the room. He reached for the box. His hands were steady. A surge of adrenaline moved through him. He told himself they were going to lose the house regardless. The sheriff would likely seize the jewelry anyway. He told himself he was simply preserving it. He told himself he'd make it right one day. But those were lies. He was robbing the last shred of his mother-in-law's dignity to rescue his own neck. He grabbed the box. He tucked it under his sweater. He backed out of the room and pulled the door shut behind him. He walked past the kitchen where his wife was in tears. He did not stop. He went straight to the back door, pushed it open, and stepped out into the cold afternoon air. He walked to his car, which he'd parked behind the garage to keep it out of the repo man's sight. He got in. He set the box on the passenger seat. He patted it once gently. He started the engine. He did not drive toward any pawn shop in town. He pointed the car at the highway. He was not going to pay the mortgage. He was not going to pay the electric bill. Garrett was gone. I watched him leave on the external camera. I saw the car vanish down the driveway. I knew exactly what he'd done. I knew what was inside that box. Part of me wanted to reach for the phone right then, but I held off. The theft would surface soon enough on its own, and when it did, the explosion would dwarf any foreclosure notice. The betrayal would be total. I leaned back in my chair. The house of cards wasn't simply collapsing, it was catching fire. And the rats weren't merely fleeing the wreckage. They were feeding on one another on the way out. Friday morning came in like a hurricane making landfall. The house was strung tight with the tension of the foreclosure notice and the hollow silence left by Garrett's disappearance. But Tiffany and Rochelle weren't out searching for Garrett. They weren't pulling boxes from closets. They were mounting their final offensive. Having decided they couldn't settle the debt with money, they would settle it with a narrative. They would shred my reputation so thoroughly that I'd have no choice but to pay them off just to walk down a street with my head up. I sat in my apartment with Desmond Fairweather at my side. We were watching the feed from Tiffany's Instagram account. She had 300,000 followers. She had built that following by posting photos of my house, my cars, and my vacations, letting people believe that she and Darnell were self-made moguls. Now she was turning that same platform into a stage where she cast herself as a martyr. At 10 o'clock sharp, a notification lit up my screen. Tiffany Colby is live. The video opened. They had staged the scene with care. They were seated on the living room floor, having chosen a corner. With a bare wall, Tiffany had stripped the art from it herself. They wore no makeup. They wore old sweatshirts. Rochelle clutched a half-empty box of cereal. They looked like refugees in a war zone. Tiffany stared into the camera. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She sniffled loudly. When she spoke, her voice came out in a trembling whisper. She said, "Hey guys, I know I usually post happy content. I know I usually show you the wins, but today I have to be real. I have to show you the truth behind the glamour." She let the pause stretch for effect. The viewer count surged. 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. People are drawn to tragedy, especially when it falls on the wealthy. She pressed on. She said, "You all know Reg Colby. You know him as the pillar of the community, the philanthropist, the successful businessman. But you do not know the monster who lives behind closed doors. For years we have lived in terror. For years we have been silent victims of his financial and emotional abuse." Rochelle joined in. She dragged a fake tear across her cheek. She said, "Dad has a secret life. He has a gambling problem. He has a mistress in the Cayman Islands. That is where all the money went. That is why he cut us off. He is funneling our family fortune to a woman half his age, while his wife of 45 years sleeps on a mattress on the floor." The comments section detonated. People were typing in all caps. They were calling me a pig. They were calling me a narcissist. They were demanding justice. Tiffany dialed up the performance. She said, "It gets worse, guys. When we confronted him, he became violent. He hit Darnell. He He threatened to kill us if we told anyone, and now he has locked the bank accounts. We have no food. My mother-in-law is starving. We are literally eating dry cereal because he wants to punish us for speaking the truth. Please, if you can help us, there is a donation link in my bio. We just need money for a lawyer and groceries." I watched the screen. My heart was hammering, not with fear, but with a cold, dark rage. They had crossed a line that couldn't be walked back. They had not just lied, they had put a knife in my character. They had accused me of violence. They had accused me of infidelity. These were lies that couldn't be taken back. These were lies that would follow me to my grave if I didn't bury them right now. Desmond looked over at me. His finger hovered above the enter key on his laptop. He asked simply, "Are you ready, Reg?" I looked at Tiffany's face on the screen. She was crying on command. She was begging for money from strangers while sitting inside a $5 million house I had paid for. I said, "Burn it down, Desmond. Release everything." Desmond pressed the key. We did not post on social media. We did not compose a status update. We went straight to the press. Desmond had a contact at the South Carolina Post and at TMZ. We sent them a digital dossier titled The Real Colby Family. It contained 3 video files and 1 PDF document. The effect was immediate. While Tiffany was still performing tears on her live stream, notification bubbles began detonating across the screens of her viewers. TMZ had already broken the story. The headline was merciless. Influencer caught in web of lies. Video evidence reveals racism and elder abuse. The first video in the file was the security footage from Sunday morning. High-definition audio and video, every frame sharp. It showed Tiffany standing in the living room. It showed her pointing at the historic East Side Renaissance painting. The audio was crisp. The world heard her say the art was ugly. They heard her call the African masks spooky voodoo trash. They heard her tell the movers to throw the black history in the dumpster because she wanted a white aesthetic. The internet has no mercy for racism, especially not when it comes from a white woman who married into a black family and built her whole life on black money. The supportive comments on her livestream dried up. They stalled for half a second, then reversed direction entirely. The chat erupted with the video link. Liar, racist, give the money back. That was all anyone was typing now. Tiffany registered the change in the room. She leaned toward the camera, brow furrowed, squinting at whatever her screen was showing her. "Guys, what video? What are you all talking about?" Then the second clip hit the internet. That was the one that ended her. Tuesday night security footage. The kitchen. Tiffany and Darnell standing over Dorothea, voices raised, fingers pointed. Tiffany directing her toward the maid's quarters, like she was reassigning staff. The whole world now had a front row seat to who the abuser actually was. They heard Tiffany call Dorothea a burden. They heard Darnell order his own mother out of the way. They watched an old woman get exiled from her bedroom to sleep in a closet. The sob story of the persecuted daughter-in-law gone. Replaced by something uglier, a woman who discarded elders and wiped out black culture without blinking. But I wasn't finished yet. The PDF began making its rounds. 10 years of my bank statements laid bare. I didn't bury the numbers. I underlined them. Darnell's private college tuition, $300,000. His failed clothing line, $50,000 of my money poured down the drain. Tiffany's lifestyle blog that went nowhere, $25,000. The Range Rover and Porsche leases, $4,000 every single month. Designer clothes, resort vacations, first class everything, $1.5 million across the decade. The final page carried one clean summary. Total given by Reginald Colby to his adult children, $5 million. Balance of Reginald Colby's supposed gambling account, 0. Because no such account exists. That document detonated on the internet like a nuclear device. The donation link in Tiffany's bio got flagged for fraud within the hour. The comment section moved so fast it was just a wall of rage, unreadable, unstoppable. Tiffany and Rochelle were still streaming. Neither of them understood what was unraveling until Tiffany's phone lit up, and it wasn't a donation ping. It was her agent, her manager, the woman who kept the brand checks coming. Tiffany rattled and reaching hit speakerphone by accident. Her agent's voice punched through the room and landed directly in the live feed. "Tiffany, cut the stream. Right now, shut it down." Tiffany stammered. "Why, what's going on?" Her agent didn't lower her voice. "You're #1 trending on Twitter, but not the way you want. That video of you dumping the African art is all over everything. Sephora just rang. Your contract is done. Fashion Nova done. Every single brand is walking. You're untouchable right now. Don't dial my number again. Watch for the termination letter. Click. Tiffany held the phone like it had burned her. Every last drop of color left her face. Her eyes went to the viewer count. 50,000 people. But not one of them was on her side anymore. They had tuned in to watch the collapse. She let out a shriek and killed the stream. It didn't matter. It was already too late. What goes on the internet stays there. Someone had captured the whole thing before she could pull the plug. Someone else already had the remix cut and posted. Rochelle, meanwhile, was deep in her own phone. She let out a wail. Dad put out the bank statements, she said, voice cracking. Everybody's seen them. My friends won't stop texting. They're laughing at us. They know how broke we are. They know we made it all up. Tiffany wound up and hurled her phone at the wall. It shattered on impact. She sank to the floor, screaming. No performance this time. The grief was real. She'd sacrificed the one thing she prized above everything else, above the house, above the money. Her platform, her image. She wasn't Tiffany Colby, the aspirational lifestyle guru, anymore. She was Tiffany Colby, the racist grifter who'd tormented her elderly mother-in-law on camera. I sat back and watched them fall apart. Watched them wheel on each other. Tiffany laid into Rochelle. She should have swept the cameras. Rochelle fired right back. Tiffany was a racist fool who torched everything they had. I shut my laptop. The quiet returned to my apartment. Something heavy left my chest in that moment. They'd gone after my name with everything they had. They'd tried to recast me as the predator, the tyrant, the hidden monster. Instead, all they'd accomplished was to hand me the instrument I needed to expose them. The smear campaign collapsed under its own weight. They'd pulled the trigger, but somewhere along the way they'd gotten the barrel turned around. Now they'd carry those marks. Desmond got up and poured 2 glasses of bourbon. He pressed one into my hand. "To the truth, Reg," he said. I held the glass and studied the dark amber color of it. "To the truth," I said back, "and to whatever comes at dawn, because the next morning I intended to make my final offer. I was going to find out whether any piece of my family was still worth reaching for, or whether everything had already burned down to cinder. Friday night unloaded a full storm on Hilton Head Island. Wind off the Atlantic slammed against the estate's windows with the kind of force that makes a house feel fragile. But the weather outside was nothing compared to what was brewing indoors. The viral footage had stripped away their standing. The bank's foreclosure notice had stripped away their future. And now the storm was peeling back whatever thin loyalty still remained between them. Dorothea sat alone in the maid's room, the rain hammering the window glass beside her. The cold had settled deep. Heat hadn't run through the house in days, and the storm's damp chill had found its way into her joints. Her stomach was empty. The kitchen had nothing left. Her thoughts kept circling back to the jewelry box. That was all she had now. Reg was gone. Her children had proven themselves useless. She'd been running the numbers in her head for the past hour. The diamond necklace maybe $10,000 if she found the right buyer. The sapphire earrings another $5,000 perhaps. Between them enough to put a roof over her head somewhere modest. Enough for groceries. Enough to walk out of this place and not look back. She pushed herself to her feet, cinched her coat around her trembling body, and moved to the dresser. The mahogany box wasn't there. She stood very still. She told herself the dark was deceiving her. Her fingers swept the dresser top, bare wood, nothing else. The panic came hard and fast. It started low in her gut and clawed its way up into her throat. She went to her knees. She reached under the bed. She checked every drawer. Empty, empty, empty. She got up and moved out of the room without making a sound. No scream, just the quiet, frantic movement of a woman who understands she's going under and has no one to call for. Kitchen, nothing. Living room, nothing. Then the lightning flashed. Through the front window caught in that white split second of light. A shape near the garage. A man moving fast toward the parked car, something squared off, and unmistakable tucked against his ribs. Garrett. He was nearly at the driver's door, bent low against the wind, trying to stay invisible. Dorothea's face pressed flat against the cold glass. She knew the outline of that box. 40 years of her life, tucked under her son-in-law's arm. The scream that came out of her started somewhere below language, raw and animal and devastating, loud enough to split the house open. She screamed that he was taking it. She screamed Darnell's name. Upstairs, Darnell had been sitting on the hallway floor, in a kind of stupor, staring at nothing. His mother's voice reached him. Garrett's name reached him. Something behind his eyes switched back on. He was on his feet and moving before the thought fully formed. He took the stairs in twos. His mother stood at the window pointing, weeping, telling him Garrett had the jewelry. Darnell didn't slow down to ask anything. Days of accumulated fury at the bank, at the house, at all of it, had finally found the right address. Not Reg. Not some faceless institution. The man who'd been eating at his table and drinking from his cellar, and was now sprinting toward a car with his mother's last lifeline under one arm. Darnell hit the front door and burst out into the rain. No shoes. He crossed the wet driveway at a dead run. Garrett had the door half open when he heard the slap of feet on wet pavement. He spun. Darnell was already on him. No hesitation, no negotiation, pure forward momentum. Garrett tried to pivot into the seat. He tried to get the box onto the passenger cushion before impact. He ran out of time. Darnell drove into him full force, and both men crashed hard into the side of the car. The mahogany box tore loose from Garrett's grip on impact. It struck the asphalt, and the latch gave way. Gold and diamonds fanned out across the rain-soaked pavement. The necklace I'd bought Dorothea in Paris. The bracelet from our anniversary. They caught the light in the rain like scattered stars, then got swallowed by the struggle, kicked and trampled by two men who were no longer thinking about what any of it was worth. Darnell's fist connected with Garrett's face. Bone on bone, the sound traveled. Garrett howled and swung back. He had no size advantage, but desperation has its own physics. He went for Darnell's eyes. He tore the shirt half off him. They went down together, rolling in the mud and rain. Whatever dignity had once separated them from this moment was gone. They were just two creatures fighting over the last scrap. Darnell got his hands around Garrett's throat and drove the back of his skull into the car's tire. He was screaming one word over and over: thief. He screamed that Garrett was a parasite. Garrett drove his foot into Darnell's stomach. Darnell buckled, folding over and sucking wind. Garrett clawed his way upright. The fight in him was gone now. It was pure flight. He tried to bolt. He tried to scoop handfuls of jewelry out of the mud. Darnell lunged and brought him down from behind. Both men crashed through the front door of the house, tumbling hard into the foyer. The console table went over. The expensive vase Tiffany loved exploded against the floor into 100 pieces. The brawl rolled indoors. They drove each other into the walls, smearing streaks of mud and blood across the white paint. They went into the staircase railing like a freight train. Tiffany and Rochelle were screaming from the top of the stairs, watching their husbands try to destroy one another. Tiffany shrieked at them to stop. Rochelle was beyond words, weeping in gasps. The men couldn't hear any of it. Hatred had gone deaf. Darnell seized a heavy bronze statue off the floor. He lifted it above his head. I was watching through the camera feed, and for one terrible second, I thought I was about to see a man murdered inside the house I had built. Then the blue light swept through the windows. Sirens cut through the noise of the storm. Someone had dialed the police. A neighbor jolted awake by the screaming maybe, or possibly Tiffany herself, realizing how far off the edge this had gone. 3 officers shouldered the door open with tasers drawn, ordering everyone to the ground. Darnell let the statue drop. He stood there staring at the officers, then down at his own blood-soaked hands, then at Garrett splayed across the floor, his face a swollen mask of cuts and bruising. The officers weren't interested in hearing anyone's version of events. 2 men, a wrecked house, blood on every surface they'd seen enough. They took Darnell down and pinned his wrists behind him. They hauled Garrett off the floor and cuffed him as well. Darnell erupted, screaming that Garrett was a thief, that Garrett had stolen his mother's diamonds. One officer glanced out at the jewelry scattered across the wet driveway. He looked at both battered men. He said, "You can explain it to the judge. Right now you are both under arrest for assault and disturbing the peace." They were marched out into the rain. My son-in-law. Frog marched out of my house like criminals off the street, shoved into the backs of separate patrol cars, the doors banged shut. Back inside, the quiet that returned was not ordinary quiet. It was the silence you hear after something irreversible has happened. Dorothea was on her knees in the foyer, collecting the shards of the broken vase, one piece at a time. She had gone past tears. She was simply numb. She studied the mud tracked across the floor. She studied the blood smeared on the wall. Tiffany stood at the top of the stairs, staring down at the wreckage below. She watched her husband being driven away in a police cruiser. She looked at her mother-in-law crouched on the floor amid the wreckage, and then something shifted in her face. Tiffany did not go down to Dorothea. She didn't pick up the phone to find Darnell a lawyer. She turned on her heel and went into the guest room. She pulled her Rimowa suitcases out from wherever she'd stowed them. I watched her pack with the cold efficiency of someone executing a plan they made long ago. Clothes, shoes, every piece of expensive makeup. Not one thing that belonged to Darnell made it into those bags. She zipped everything shut, shrugged on her coat, and came downstairs. She stepped over broken glass. She walked straight past Dorothea without a word. Dorothea looked up from the floor. She asked, "Where are you going?" Tiffany didn't slow her stride. She pushed the front door open. Rain and wind rushed in. She paused in the doorway and turned back just once. Her face held nothing, no guilt, no grief, no hesitation. She said, "I am done. This family is cursed. I am going to my mother's house. Do not call me." She walked out into the storm, hauling her suitcases down the rain-soaked driveway, past the squad cars pulling away from the curb. At the street corner, she called an Uber. Dorothea was left alone in the ruins. The jewelry had been collected by the police as evidence. Her son was locked up. Her daughter-in-law had vanished into the night. The house was days away from foreclosure. I sat in my apartment with my eyes closed. The alliance had collapsed. The rats had turned on each other, and the ship had gone all the way under. There was only one move left. I had to go back not to rescue anyone, but to stand over what remained. 3 months is nothing in the life of a man. In the life of a family that has forfeited its soul, it is a lifetime. I spent those 90 days constructing something new. I purchased a modern glass house perched on the cliffs of Malibu. The Pacific laid out below me, as far as the eye could reach. It was a long way from the humidity of Hilton Head Island, and farther still from the people who had shown me who they were. I woke every morning to the sound of the surf and the scent of eucalyptus on the air. I drank my coffee on a terrace that seemed to hover over the water itself. I had found something I had nearly forgotten: peace. A daily rhythm that wasn't built around rescuing people who resented the hand that pulled them up. I was mending, and I knew the way you know a weather system is coming before the clouds arrive, that they would show up eventually. A parasite has no survival instinct beyond finding a host, and I was the only host they had ever learned to use. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the intercom at the gate sounded. I was in the library with a book. I didn't reach for the camera. I already knew. I pressed the button, and the iron gates swung open. I watched them make their way up the long, winding driveway on foot, no car to bring them to the door. They'd come by taxi, dropped at the base of the hill, because the fare to the top was more than they could manage. I stood on the balcony and took them in. The sight was difficult to look at, and not in the way they might have hoped. They didn't look like the Colby family anymore. They looked like people the world had chewed up and left on the curb. Dorothea was at the front of the group. I recognized her coat, but it was stained and had gone unironed for weeks. The hair that used to be colored and set on a schedule, gray now, and sparse. She had shed weight she couldn't afford to lose. Her face was hollowed out, her eyes moving quickly and nervously, sweeping across the architecture and the grounds of my new home. She looked like a faint outline of the woman who had once stood on a stage and declared her independence. Darnell and Rochelle trailed behind her, and they looked worse. Darnell wore a suit that had been cut for a bigger man, a man he no longer was because he'd stopped eating. His shoes were scuffed and dull. He walked favoring one leg, a permanent reminder of what the driveway fight with Garrett had cost him. Rochelle had left the designer wardrobe behind somewhere along the way. She came in jeans and a plain shirt, no phone in her hand, just a plastic bag carrying what little she still owned. They gathered at the front door. I made them wait. I let them stand there in the ocean breeze long enough to see their own faces reflected back in the polished glass, their failure looking them in the eye. When I opened the door, what reached me first was a smell. Desperation has its own scent. Cheap motel soap and clothes that hadn't been properly washed in too long. They looked at me. I was in a linen shirt, relaxed trousers, rested, healthy. The gap between what I looked like and what they looked like was the kind of thing that doesn't need words. I was standing on the other side of what they'd put me through, and I had come out whole. I stepped back and gestured them in. No smile, no greeting, just 2 words: come in. They crossed the threshold and the house stopped them cold. Italian marble underfoot. Original art on the walls. Floor-to-ceiling glass framing the Pacific, an endless blue, indifferent expanse. They moved through it like people walking into a place they knew they had no claim to. We settled in the living room. I took my armchair. I didn't invite anyone to sit. They clustered together in front of me like children outside the principal's office, braced, guilty, waiting. Nobody spoke for a long moment. The only sound was the ocean working against the rocks far below. Then Darnell moved. My son. The man who had called me a tyrant. The man who had tried to strike my name from every wall of the life I'd built. He went to his knees. Not with any kind of dignity. He folded. He came across the marble floor toward me on hands and knees. He found my hand and held it. His grip was rough and unsteady. He raised his face to me, tears running freely. He said, "Dad," a single word. He hadn't called me that in 10 years. It had been Reg or the old man, or simply him, said like a name for something he didn't respect. But now, with nothing left to shield himself with, he reached for the only word that had any power. He said, "Dad, please, I am begging you. You have to help us. I cannot take it anymore. The bail bondsman is looking for me. I missed my court date because I did not have money for a cab. They are going to put me back in jail. Dad, I cannot go back there. I am scared. I am so scared." He pressed his forehead against my knee and wept. Not polite crying, the ugly broken kind that comes from a man with nothing left. He said, "I am sorry. I was stupid. I was arrogant. I did not know. I thought I could run the business. I thought I was smart. But I am nothing without you. I am just a fraud. Please, Dad, save me. I will do anything. I will work in the mailroom. I will wash the trucks. Just don't let them take me back to jail." I looked down at him. A flicker of pity moved through me, and I put it out like a match. Pity was the very thing that had led us to this room. Rochelle stepped forward. She didn't drop to her knees, but her eyes were wet. She said, "Dad, it was not our fault. It was Tiffany. She brainwashed us. She made us hate you. She told us we deserve more. We were just confused. Dad, she is gone now. She left us. We are all alone. Look at Mom." She gestured toward Dorothea. Dorothea was standing near the window. She turned and found my eyes across the room. Tears were moving silently down her face. She came over and lowered herself onto the ottoman in front of me. She reached for my other hand. Her fingers were cold to the touch. She said, "Reg, look at us. We are your family. We spent 45 years together. Does that mean nothing to you? Do you remember when we started with nothing in that one-bedroom apartment in North Charleston? We built this empire together. Reg, I nursed you when you had your heart attack. I raised your children. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But I'm paying for it. I am living in a shelter, Reg. A shelter. I am sleeping on a cot next to strangers." She tightened her grip on my hand. Her eyes searched my face, hunting for the husband she had discarded. She pressed on. She said, "I miss you, Reg. Not the money. I miss you. I miss your voice. I miss the way you make coffee. I am sorry I signed those papers. I was angry. I was foolish. But I am still your wife. In the eyes of God, we are still married. Please, Reb, let us come home. Let us fix this. We can be a family again. We have learned our lesson. We know now that you were the heart of this family. Without you, we are just dust." I sat through all of it, every apology, every excuse. I measured each word carefully. I was looking for something real, some evidence of genuine remorse. What I found instead was fear dressed up in the language of love. They weren't sorry for the damage they had done to me. They were sorry the money was gone. They were sorry their stomachs were empty. They were sorry the consequences had arrived and refused to leave. If it had gone the other way, if I had fallen, and they had kept everything, they would not be here. They would be sitting comfortably back in Hilton Head Island, laughing at the old man. But I kept all of that off my face. I had something in motion. And for it to land correctly, they needed to believe I was still the same tender, forgiving fool they had always been able to work. I let out a slow, heavy sigh. I took in the sight of Darnell, crumpled against my knee. Dorothea trembling on the ottoman, Rochelle huddled near the wall. I gently withdrew my hand from Darnell's grip and rose to my feet. They went rigid. They were certain I was about to call someone to remove them. They braced for the door to open. Instead, I crossed to the side table. I picked up the silver teapot. I poured 3 cups of Earl Grey tea. The china clinked softly in the still room. That small, civilized sound seemed to belong to a different world. I handed a cup to Dorothea. I handed a cup to Rochelle. I set the third on the table within Darnell's reach. I returned to my chair. I sipped my tea. I looked at them with an expression arranged into something that resembled weary resignation. I spoke at a low, even volume. I said, "You look terrible, all of you. Dorothea nodded, pressing her fingers beneath her eyes. She said, "We are living in hell, Reg." I nodded once slowly. I said, "I never wanted this. I wanted you to feel what it cost. I wanted you to understand what $1 actually means, what respect actually means, but I never wanted to watch my family come apart. I never wanted my son in a jail cell or my wife on a shelter cot." Darnell lifted his face from the floor. Something kindled behind his eyes. He said, "Does that mean you will help us, Dad?" I turned toward the window and let my gaze settle on the ocean. I allowed the silence to stretch long enough for them to feel every second of it. Then I faced them again. I said, "Yes, I will help you." The relief that moved through that room had physical weight. Darnell sagged back onto the floor, but it was different this time. Not collapse, but release. Rochelle broke into a loud, shaking sob. Dorothea covered her face and murmured something to God. I raised a hand to bring them back. I said, "But things are going to be different this time. I am not going to hand you cash and watch you waste it. I am not going to cover your bills so you can return to being ungrateful. We are going to do this legally. We are going to do this properly." I got up and walked to my desk. I lifted a leather folder from the surface. I had assembled it days earlier because I always knew this moment was coming. I came back and stood before them, the folder held flat between my palms. I said, "Inside this folder is the answer to every problem you walked in here with. I have arranged repayment of the bank loan, the foreclosure stops. I have arranged legal representation for Darnell and Garrett, so neither of them goes to prison. I have arranged a monthly stipend for Dorothea so she can live with dignity." They stared at the folder, the way starving people stare at a meal. They were barely containing the impulse to reach out and take it. I said, "But to release these funds, I need signatures, standard agreements. They simply confirm that you acknowledge my assistance and agree to live by my terms going forward. A fresh start. A clean slate." Darnell was already on his feet. He said, "I will sign anything, Dad. Anything you want. Just give me the pen." Dorothea was nodding before he'd finished the sentence. She said, "Of course, Reggie. Whatever you say, we trust you." I offered a smile, quiet, a little sad. The kind of smile you give someone for what they could have been if they had simply chosen to be decent. I opened the folder and arranged the documents on the coffee table. 3 separate contracts, heavy paper, dense with fine print. I placed a pen in Darnell's hand. I placed a pen in Dorothea's hand. I said, "Take your time and read them or just sign at the bottom." They did not read a single word. They didn't even glance at the titles. Hunger and desperation had burned away every instinct for caution. They would have signed a contract with the devil himself if it promised a way out. Darnell went first, pressing so hard the pen nearly cut through. Rochelle signed next. Dorothea signed last, her hand trembling as her name appeared beside the line. They set the pens down. They looked up at me, wearing the first genuine smiles I'd seen from them all afternoon. In their minds, the nightmare had ended. They thought they'd gotten away with it one final time. They were certain they had played the old man again. I lifted the documents. I checked every signature. Each one was valid. Each one would hold up. I closed the folder and pressed it against my chest. Then I looked at them, and whatever warmth had occupied my face was gone. The patience, the resignation, the softness, all of it withdrew at once. I said, "Thank you. You have just given me exactly what I needed." Darnell's brow creased. He said, "What do you mean, Dad? When do we get the money?" I walked to the door and pressed the button on the wall. The security system chimed. I turned back to face them. I said, "You don't get the money, Darnell. The bank gets the money. The lawyers get the money. You get something else entirely." I opened the door. 2 security guards filled the frame. I looked at my family, at what remained of them, and I pointed. I said, "Escort these trespassers off my property. If they come back, show the police the restraining orders they just signed." The bewilderment on their faces was total. It hadn't landed yet. They had signed their own banishment with borrowed pens and shaking hands. As the guards moved forward, I readied myself to deliver the final lesson, the one that would close the chapter on the Colby family once and for all. The folder sat on the coffee table between us, like a weapon waiting to be used. To my starving family, it had looked like salvation. To me, it had always been the last test of who they truly were. I watched their eyes lock onto the leather cover. They had not been looking at me with love. Their eyes were fixed on the object that held the checkbook. I eased the folder open and laid the 3 documents flat across the glass surface. The paper was thick, cream-colored, dense, with legal language. I had spent hours alongside Desmond Fairweather, building these pages, making sure that every clause was a trapdoor. I looked at Darnell. I looked at Rochelle. I looked at Dorothea. My voice stayed soft, almost welcoming. I explained that what lay before them was a standard admission of liability. For me to settle their debts through proper legal channels, I told them I needed a formal acknowledgement that those debts belonged to them. My accountants required a paper trail confirming I bore no responsibility for their fraud. By putting their names to these pages, I said, they would simply be confirming that they had fabricated the abuse allegations and burned through the family's assets. I leaned in. I held Darnell's eyes. I said, "Son, I am willing to wipe the slate clean. I am willing to wire the $800,000 to the bank within the hour. I am willing to pay the bail bondsman. I am willing to set your mother up in a condo. All you have to do is tell the truth. Sign your name. Admit that you lied about me. Admit that you stole the jewelry. Admit that you staged the stroke. Give me the truth, and I will give you your lives back." The room held still for one beat. The ocean outside seemed to pause with it. I could see the machinery turning behind their eyes. Not one of them was reading the fine print. Not one of them was studying the clauses covering irrevocable waivers or restraining orders. They heard one thing, $800,000. They saw one thing, a warm room and a full plate. And in that moment, the last pretense of family came apart entirely. Darnell moved first. He didn't reach for the pen politely. He dove for it. He scrambled across the marble on his knees, fingernails dragging across the floor. He shouted that he would sign first. He was the oldest, he screamed, and the jail time alone put him ahead of everyone else in need. But Rochelle was quicker. She snatched the pen off the table. She yelled that Darnell had already destroyed the company. She yelled that she deserved to be rescued first, because she had only been following orders. She pressed the pen toward the paper, but Darnell seized her wrist. He wrenched it. He had no concern for the fact that she was his sister. She was simply standing between him and his way out. They grappled on the floor of my living room, in a display so ugly I had to force myself to keep watching. They were clawing and biting and hurling obscenities at one another, and as they fought they screamed out their crimes. Rochelle shrieked that Darnell was the one who sold the art. Darnell shrieked that Rochelle was the one who called the ambulance. Each of them was racing to confess, trying to establish themselves as the lesser villain, so they could claim the victim's place. And then came the moment that extinguished the last ember of love I had left for them. Dorothea reached for the second pen. She was frail. Months in a shelter had hollowed her out. She simply wanted to sign. She simply wanted this to be over. She stretched her trembling hand toward the document. Darnell saw her. My son watched his own mother reaching for the thing he wanted, and he made his choice. He did not step aside for her. He did not help her. He shoved her. He planted his palm square in the center of her chest and drove her backward. Dorothea fell against the leg of the armchair and hit the floor with a heavy, solid thud. She lay there gasping, one hand pressed to her chest. Her eyes were wide and uncomprehending. Her own son had put his hands on her to beat her to a signature. Darnell didn't spare her a glance. He grabbed the pen. He flattened the document with his forearm. He was breathing like something cornered. He dragged his name across the signature line so hard the pen tip punched through the page. He signed it. Darnell Marcus Colby. He raised the paper above his head with a wild manic grin. He said, "I signed it, Dad. I did it. I told the truth. I admitted everything. Now pay the bail. Now save me." Rochelle shouldered him aside and scrawled her name on her copy. She was sobbing between words. She said, "I signed too, Dad. I admitted that Tiffany made me do it. I admitted the lies." Dorothea pulled herself up off the floor. She did not look at Darnell. Her gaze came to rest on me. Every last shred of dignity had left her face. She took the pen from Rochelle's hand. With a shaking grip, she wrote her name. She admitted to the conspiracy. She admitted to the theft. She signed it all away. They sat back. They were panting. They looked up at me with wide, expectant eyes, waiting for the checkbook, waiting for the embrace, waiting for the hot meal and the soft bed. I got to my feet slowly. I gathered all 3 documents. I checked each signature. They were clear. They were captured on my security cameras. They were legally binding confessions of felony fraud, perjury, and criminal conspiracy. I carried them to my desk. I placed them inside the safe. I turned the dial. Click, click, click. I came back around to face them. I did not smile. The grandfatherly warmth was gone. The mask was off. I stood straight. I buttoned my blazer. I looked at them the way a judge looks at a defendant he has already sentenced. I said, "Thank you." Darnell blotted the sweat from his forehead. He let out a shaky laugh. He said, "You are welcome, Dad. Glad we could clear the air. So, how does this work? Do you wire the money to the lawyer, or do you cut a check? I walked to the window. I stood with my back to them, looking out at the wide, indifferent Pacific. I said, "There seems to be a misunderstanding. I never said I would pay your debts. I said I would help you, and I have just helped you accomplish the most important thing you will ever do. I have helped you face the consequences of your own actions." Darnell went still. The smile slid off his face. He said, "What do you mean you said if we signed you would pay?" I turned from the window. I walked toward them. I let my height fill the space between us. I said, "No, Darnell. I said if you signed, I would give you a fresh start. And this is it. Those documents you just signed are not simply confessions. If you had read the header, you would have seen the title: Voluntary Admission of Guilt and Irrevocable Waiver of Financial Claims." I watched the color drain out of their faces. I watched the horror arrive. I kept going, my voice climbing, with the weight of everything I'd held back. I said, "You just admitted in writing to defrauding me. You admitted to filing false police reports. You admitted to grand larceny. And most importantly, you admitted that Reginald Colby owes you absolutely nothing. These documents are now the evidence I need to file a permanent restraining order against all three of you." Dorothea let out a low wail and folded against the sofa. I turned to Darnell. I leveled a finger at his face. I said, "You pushed your mother. I watched you do it. You shoved the woman who gave birth to you out of the way to get to a checkbook. That was the test, Darnell. And you failed it. You are not a victim. You are a predator. And I do not live with predators. I hunt them." Darnell lurched to his feet. He grabbed for me. He screamed, "You tricked us! You lied to us!" I didn't move. I pressed the button on my desk. The heavy oak doors swung inward. 4 private security contractors came through. These were not the kind of men Darnell was used to dealing with. These were former military, large, quiet, and already moving. I said, "Gentlemen, please remove these trespassers from my home. They have admitted to felony crimes committed against me on this property. If they resist, use whatever force is necessary." 2 guards took hold of Darnell. He screamed and kicked. He looked like a child mid-tantrum, but the guards lifted him as though he had no weight at all and moved him toward the door. Rochelle tried to bolt, but a guard had her arm before she'd taken 3 steps. She dissolved into tears. Sorry, she didn't mean it. She was sorry. Dorothea remained on the floor. She did not try to rise. A guard approached her without roughness. He touched her shoulder. He said, "Ma'am, you have to go." She looked at me. Her eyes held nothing. A whisper, "Reg, please, where will I go?" I looked back at her. I looked at the woman I had loved for 45 years, and I felt at the absence of feeling. Whatever had lived in me for her had gone out the moment I watched Darnell's hand hit her chest. I said, "You can go wherever you want, Dorothea. You got what you asked for. Independence. A life free of my presence. Well, congratulations, that wish has been granted. Walk out the door and breathe the free air. But every dollar I built stays where it belongs with the man who built it." The guards got her on her feet and escorted her out. Darnell was losing his mind somewhere down the hallway, shrieking that I was a monster, that I deserved to die surrounded by nothing. I moved to the doorway and watched the whole scene unfold. Both of them hauled down the driveway, thrashing, wailing, shedding whatever remained of their self-respect on the pavement. Cast out of paradise for the oldest reason in the book, they wanted everything and were willing to destroy the hand that fed them to get it. I did not look away until the iron gates had swallowed them whole. Those gates swung shut on their own. Clang. That sound closed a chapter. The lock caught and held. I stood in that spot for a long while, not moving. I was the only one left in a house built for a family. My son had a prison cell waiting. My wife had a shelter bed waiting. My daughter had the open street waiting. And standing there in all of that, I felt something cross my face that had not crossed it in months. I smiled. Not with joy. It was the expression of a surgeon stepping back from the table, having removed every last trace of the disease. There is pain in that moment. There will always be a scar. But the malignancy is gone, and now the healing can start. I turned from the door and went back to my living room. Darnell's teacup sat untouched where I had left it. The tea inside had gone stone cold. I tipped it down the drain. Then I opened the safe and pulled out the confessions, those pages I had worked so long to obtain. I turned them over in my hands. What I was holding was more than paperwork. Those documents were proof of my sanity, my patience, my rightness. They were the deed to my own freedom. I stepped through the balcony doors. The Pacific was swallowing the sun whole, and the sky above it had gone purple and gold burning at the edges. Salt filled my lungs with every breath. I found my phone scrolled to the name and called Desmond Fairweather. "It is done, Desmond," I told him. "File the papers. Get copies to the district attorney and make sure the shelter receives one as well. They need to understand that Mrs. Colby is no longer my financial responsibility." I ended the call and turned back to the horizon, letting the silence settle. My name is Reginald Colby, 72 years old, no wife, no children. Yet, as the sun slid beneath the surface of that water, something became absolutely clear to me. I still have the one thing that was always mine to begin with: myself. And after 45 years of giving that away piece by piece, of letting it be borrowed and spent without thanks, having it back is not just enough. It is everything. I have won. What surrounded me in that moment was not emptiness. It was the pure, unbroken sound of victory. The collapse of the Colby name did not announce itself with any drama, no fire, no explosion. What brought it all down was the soft drag of a pen across a foreclosure deed and the dull, metallic snap of a padlock on a gate. 2 weeks after I had them removed from my property, the bank took possession of the Hilton Head Island estate. I stayed away from the auction entirely. Desmond told me afterward that a hedge fund manager from Georgia picked it up for far less than it was worth. The man wasted no time, painted straight over the brick, gutted every room down to the studs. Whatever traces my family had left in those walls were gone inside a month. The home I raised from the ground as a testament to what I had built is now nothing more than a line item in a stranger's investment portfolio. But watching the house erased was trivial compared to watching the ego get erased. My children had moved through life as though their position was permanent, as though the comfort I provided was simply the natural order of things. Now they were learning otherwise. Darnell stayed out of prison, I saw, to that with the lawyers I retained as one last act of mercy. That mercy, though, ran out at the courthouse steps. A felony record for fraud and assault follows a man everywhere in South Carolina. No firm would touch him. The would-be CEO now pulls the dinner shift at a diner in North Charleston. I took a drive past that place one evening, caught him through the glass, white apron, food-stained, moving between tables with a gray rag in his hand. A customer snapped at him, too slow apparently. And my son, who once reduced restaurant staff to tears with his tirades, dropped his chin and said he was sorry. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out, like someone who had finally painfully come to understand that $1 is not a given, you have to earn it one dirty dish at a time. Rochelle landed no softer. What she did and who she showed herself to be, that footage those words lived on in every search result attached to her name. No one in marketing or social media would go near her. She stocks shelves on the overnight shift at a discount retail chain, now pulling boxes off pallets in a back room, surrounded by the kind of cheap merchandise she used to ridicule. 4 people share the studio apartment she calls home. No car, bus pass. I think about her sometimes waiting at the stop in the drizzle, and I wonder whether the memory of that Range Rover I used to put her in crosses her mind, whether she can still hear the engine. And Dorothea, my wife, the woman who carried herself like a queen, the woman who said she wanted her freedom. The state found her a bed in a publicly funded facility up in North Augusta. It is functional, clean enough. But it is not Hilton Head Island. No private room, no view of the water. The smell that greets you in the corridor is industrial strength cleaner, and whatever is on the stove in the kitchen, usually something boiled, her roommate cries out in the night. Dorothea eats off a plastic tray, and her clothing goes through the communal wash with everyone else's. I asked Desmond to look in on her once. He came back and told me she passes most of her hours parked beside the window eyes, fixed on the brick face of the next building over. She tells whoever will listen that her husband is on his way, that he is a man of considerable means. The nurses nod, squeeze her hand, and quietly see to her medication. They think she is senile. They have no idea she is telling the truth. Her husband is indeed a man of considerable means. He simply is not coming. I sit on my Malibu terrace on certain evenings and turn the whole question of family over in my mind. From the cradle we are handed the same doctrine: family is sacred. Blood runs thicker. You forgive because you must. To sever that tie is to commit something close to a sin. I accepted all of that for 70 years, carried it like gospel, and it was used against me like a blade held at my throat every time I showed the slightest sign of pulling back. Those people drained me dry and called it love. But out here watching the Pacific come in wave after wave, I have arrived somewhere different. Blood is not a binding agreement. Your DNA does not obligate you to self-destruction. The people who deserve to be called family are the ones who show up at the bedside when everything has gone wrong. They are the ones who speak your name with respect in rooms where you are not present. That is what family means: loyalty, mutual regard. I functioned for decades as a gardener who could not bring himself to cut back a single dying branch, pouring water and money into roots that had long since rotted through, telling myself that enough care might reverse what was already dead. But decay does not reverse itself. It moves outward. It takes the living wood with it if you wait too long. Removing them was the only way to preserve what was still worth saving. Not brutality medicine. You take off the limb so the body does not follow it into the ground. Do I feel their absence? On certain mornings, yes, though what I feel the loss of is not them exactly. It is the version of them I wanted them to be. The devoted wife. The children who understood what they had been given. That family never existed outside my own hope for it. The real version, the dread at every dinner, the hollow feeling of being measured only against what I could still provide, the silence that lasted until someone slid a request across the table that I do not miss for a single moment. I have come to understand something I could not have put into words 2 years ago. Solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. They have almost nothing in common. Right now, I am alone, genuinely completely alone in the traditional sense. And I cannot recall a period in my life when I have felt less hollow. My own peace keeps me company. I have built a small circle of people who deal with me straight, who give me the same regard I give them. I know what my reflection means when I see it now. I took that back. I reclaim my name. Look at where the sky is orange bleeding into violet, the light almost gone. I bought a 58-foot yacht last week, and I am sitting on her deck right now, the warm wood pressing up against the soles of my bare feet. I named her The New Horizon. A jazz record moves through the speakers at low volume, a trumpet climbing and bending through a solo, rising and falling like something riding the wind. I am not out here by myself, though. There is someone sitting across from me. Her name is Celeste. She spent her career as a literature professor before she retired, and we met by chance in a bookstore in Los Angeles. My bank balance has never once come up between us. She has no need of it. What draws her is the conversation, the thinking, the back and forth. She finds me funny. She actually listens when I talk about my years at the port of Charleston. When she looks at me, she sees a man, not a wallet with legs. Tonight she has on a simple white dress, a glass of champagne resting in her hand. She catches my eye and lifts her glass toward me. I raise mine to meet it. The crystal touches with a soft, clear ring, a toast aimed at whatever comes next. Then something cuts through the quiet. A cell phone buzzing and crying out from the table between us. I glance down at the screen. The number is not in my contacts, but I know it immediately. It belongs to the nursing station at the facility in North Augusta. It keeps ringing once, twice, 3 times more. Celeste looks at me and asks whether I ought to pick up, whether it matters. I look at the phone and let my mind go there for a moment. I see Dorothea on the other end of that line. I hear the pleading in her voice before she even speaks. The tears. The appeal for one more chance, one more rescue, one more piece of me to take and spend. I reach down and pick the phone up. The weight of it surprises me every time, not the physical weight, but what it carries. 45 years of history. 45 years of obligation pressing against my palm. Still it rings trembling in my grip like something that will not let go. I get to my feet and cross to the railing. Below the ocean is dark and bottomless. I look back at Celeste. I smile at her. No, I tell her. It is nothing. Wrong number. I extend my arm out past the rail over the water, my fingers open. The phone drops. It catches the last of the sunset as it tumbles, flashing once, twice. Then it meets the surface with a small, unremarkable splash and disappears. The ringing cuts off. The vibration dies. Whatever thread was still attached, it is gone now. I watch the ring spread out across the water and fade until the surface is glassy and still. The past has found its resting place down there in the deep where it belongs. I return to my seat beside Celeste. I settle in and bring the champagne to my lips. Cold, bright bubbles. She reaches over and takes my hand. Her touch is warm. "What's on your mind, Reg?" she asks. I let my eyes drift to where the sun is dissolving into the horizon. I tell her I am thinking what a fine evening it is, that for perhaps the first time in all my years I am sitting in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. The picture fades to dark, but my life, the real one, is only now getting started. I came to understand that a true legacy has nothing to do with what you accumulate. It lives in what you model for the people watching you. For decades, I mistook providing for parenting, believed that financial comfort was the same thing as raising children well. All I actually did was breed entitlement and shield them from the very friction that builds character. The hardest truth I had to make peace with is this: there are moments when walking away from the people you love is the only honest act of self-preservation left to you. Family is not something you are handed at birth and owed forever. It is something that has to be earned again and again through the simple practice of mutual respect. If you are living in a house where your words go unheard, but your bank account is treated like a prayer answered, leave. Peace will cost you something. It cost me everything, and it was worth every cent. If you have stayed with me this far, then you already know this was never really a story about money. It was about what happens when a man finally decides that his own life is worth protecting. I think about what it cost Reginald Colby to get to that deck champagne in hand, peace in his chest. Decades of his best years poured into people who mistook his steadiness for weakness. I believe God does not waste suffering, and the long road Reginald walked, every humiliation, every betrayal, every sleepless night, running the numbers in a city apartment no one knew about, was preparing him for a freedom he had not yet learned to want. That is the kind of lesson that does not come cheap, but it stays with you. Here is what this family revenge story left me thinking about, and what I hope you carry with you. If your generosity is only acknowledged when the checkbook is open, that is not love, it is a transaction. Walk away from it. Prepare in silence. Let the results speak when the time comes. Reginald did not argue or plead. He built his exit while they celebrated too early. For adults 50 plus, especially, it is never too late to reclaim your own name. Reginald was 72. The new horizon was waiting. And finally, a confession signed in: greed is still a confession. What people reveal when they believe they are winning will always tell you everything you need to know. If this story stirred something in you, leave a comment below and tell me what hit hardest. Share it with someone who needs the reminder that peace is worth the price. And if you have not yet subscribed to Honor Revenge Stories, now is a good time. There is much more where this came from. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, take good care of yourself.